How y'all doing tonight? I can't figure out how to get this off here, but anyways, hey, thanks for coming, guys. My name is Steven, and we're here. We're here to protect children, right? Just give you a little background on why we're doing what we're doing, where this came from. We noticed a lot of people in this town throughout the Verde Valley really cared and were showing up and took initiative to stand up for children, for people who cannot speak for themselves, our youth, some of our most vulnerable people. So we looked at the community. We wanted to continue to serve the community. And in our networking, we met some incredible people who would be subject matter experts on this stuff. And we brought them to this forum today to serve you, to further educate you. So tonight we're going to go do a deep dive into some of this stuff. You're not going to be able to say that's wrong. You're going to know why it's wrong. And you're going to have courage behind that further knowledge to continue to step up and protect our children. So that's why we are here in this forum tonight. It must be noted that only but one of our speakers tonight is not from Yavapai County. This has been truly pushed by people throughout the Verde Valley and organized by people of the Verde Valley. So we live in live amongst incredible people. So thank you so much. This is not necessarily a political event, but we are in a presidential election year. So, and I just want to give thanks for our courageous candidates stepping up into that space. It takes a lot of courage in the environment that we are in to step up and be a leader and take on the questions and be the sounding board for both sides, for and against different causes. So thank you so much. Thank you for coming here to this event to learn and to hear from the public. I do have to address, and by God's grace, I don't think they have shown up, but we did get some intel that there might be some troublemakers, believe it or not, showing up to this event. So the ground rules is you're welcome here in this private event. This isn't a public event. Listen and learn with intention and respect, and you're welcome to stay. But we do reserve the right to escort you out if you're going to be a disruptor. We're not going to tolerate. We are here to learn from our speakers, and they deserve to be respected. So, with that being said, I'd like to do the Pledge of Allegiance with all y'all, and we'll get on with our speakers. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Our first speaker tonight is going to be Andrea Kadar. She's a conservative activist, and this girl is fire. Come on, Andrea.
Got the clicker, dears? Yep, here we go. So, Ray, can you put up the presentation? There we go. Excellent work. So, guys, welcome. It's so good to see all of you at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, and you're so brave to come out and work with us tonight. Let's talk about the ultimate way to protect our children. Let's talk about protecting our children before they're ever born. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk facts. We're not going to get emotional. We're going to talk facts because there's a lot happening in Arizona, and you are well-informed voters. I want you to know exactly what is going on with a constitutional amendment that is making its way toward the Arizona ballot if it gets enough signatures. The constitutional amendment, the proposed one, is called the Arizona Abortion Access Act. There are signature gatherers right now in the streets gathering enough signatures to get this on the ballot in November in Arizona. Now, what it does is, and you have a copy of it because I made sure that your handout has almost everything that I'm going to tell you tonight so that you can stay informed and you can inform others when you go home. So what does the Arizona Abortion Access Act essentially say? It codifies into the Constitution of the state of Arizona a fundamental right, essentially unrestricted, to abortion in Arizona, including termination of pregnancy up to the 9th month. Now, Governor Hobbs and AG Mays are for it. Again, they are paying signature gatherers to get signatures to get it on the ballot. We'll know in July if it's going to get on the ballot. Why, guys, would the people who are pushing this constitutional amendment, why would they want a CA? What's the advantage of doing a constitutional amendment in Arizona? I know you're an educated, sophisticated audience. Yes, sir.
So when you do that, you avoid when laws are made by the legislature, they're changeable. When you do this, it is not changeable. Once it's done, there's no going back.
That's right. Pete is absolutely right. It is almost impossible to reverse a constitutional amendment. You need another constitutional amendment to do it. You guys are sophisticated buyers. You know that in Arizona, even ballot initiatives are hard to reverse. So the point of this story is, please read any ballot initiative or constitutional amendment and know exactly what's in it before you vote for it. Because if you vote for it and it passes and you're unhappy with it, it's virtually impossible to reverse. So important to do that in Arizona. So who is supporting the potential constitutional amendment and who's funding it? Planned Parenthood is very big on having this pass in Arizona. The ACLU is very interested in it. They're actually floating the constitutional amendment in other states. We're not the only state where this is happening. So you'll see news about this around the country. Will it qualify for the ballot? How many signatures do you need in Arizona to get a constitutional amendment on the November ballot? 300 and what? 85,000. The group that is gathering signatures right now is going for 500,000 because they want to make sure that this qualifies. And they're saying to the people that they're signing up, i.e. the petition gatherers, that it's a women's health issue, but it's much more than that. And that's why I want you to be a sophisticated audience. Okay, let's talk about it for a second, because it is literally 1.5 pages long. That's how short it is, and you have a copy in your handout because I wanted you to be able to take it home and look at it. So let's talk about one of the first things that it says. The constitutional amendment, the proposed one, says Arizonans, if it passes, will have a fundamental right to abortion. No law, regulation, policy, practice can be enacted or enforced that denies, restricts, or interferes with that right. Hold it. That's so important, I'm going to read it to you again slowly, because this is really essential that we understand. This particular CA says that you'll have a fundamental right to abortion. No law, regulation, policy, or practice can be enacted, enforced, or that denies, restricts, or interferes with that right. That is very broad language. Essentially, that's a little bit of the Wild West of access. I just want you to know how broad the CA is. What else is in it? It says if the healthcare provider, a healthcare provider, decides that the pregnancy jeopardizes the life, physical, or mental health of the mom, the pregnancy can be terminated after viability. Let's go backwards and unpack all that. Viability is the baby's ability to survive on his or her own. So let me rephrase that. If the healthcare provider, first of all, who is that? Under Arizona law, I want you to see who healthcare providers are. Are they just medical doctors? Look at this list. It's everything from therapists, veterinarians, chiropractors. Now you might say, well, look, Andrea, no chiropractor is going to have an abortion practice. But in other states where constitutional amendments like this have passed, they have practices where they prescribe abortion pills. So it does happen. So under the CA, it's not just doctors, but it is healthcare providers that can decide whether or not the pregnancy should end after viability. Now listen, did you hear what I said about the jeopardization, the life, physical, or mental health? That's the first time we've seen mental health. What pregnant mom is not stressed in her 9th month? So again, that is very broad language. Listen to this. If you aid or coerce or assist a pregnant individual, it should be women, right? Pregnant individual is trans language, which will be codified into our Constitution, just so you understand that. If you aid or assist or coerce a pregnant individual into abortion, you can't be penalized or prosecuted for helping. Many of you know that Dwight and I have spent a lot of years talking all over Arizona about sex trafficking prevention and drug use prevention. Sex traffickers drag their victims to abortion clinics all the time. Sometimes so do well-meaning nurses and coaches. Under the CA, they can't be prosecuted for forcing one of the victims in their stable to have an abortion. Okay, so I want you to look at the actual CA. It's in your package, but let's keep going in the essence of time. So how would this passage of the amendment affect existing law? Does anybody know what would happen to existing law if this constitutional amendment passes? I know Pete does. Yes, everything that's on the books now would be negated or reversed. Now, something big happened in the last 6 weeks, right? We had the Arizona Supreme Court declare that the existing law was reversible back to the pre-1973 law. There was a lot of news about that. Then what did the legislature do? A few key people in the legislature, not all of them, of course, 3 Republicans and 2 Senate members. They reversed or overturned the Supreme Court decision, and the existing law came back into effect. Does everybody know that? Okay, we need to be clear on that. Well, okay, so if there's an existing law right now in Arizona, let's look at it together. Let's do it quickly, but I want you to understand what the existing law is and how the CA, the constitutional amendment, would be different. So, right now in Arizona, what's the maximum gestational age? 15 weeks, right? Let me go back one slide. So, after 15 weeks in Arizona, under the existing law, the pregnancy can be terminated only to save the life of the mom. If the baby is born alive in Arizona under Arizona law, then every effort must be to save that baby's life. No research, experimentation, or trafficking of baby parts is allowed in Arizona under the existing law. Abortion clinics right now under the law must be regulated, licensed. They must be medical facilities and meet very strict requirements. Abortions must be performed by trained and licensed who? Perfect. Medical doctors. Okay, I want to show you a chart real quick because I think this chart is very telling. This is a chart of Europe. If you can see on the far left, that's Great Britain. So that's 24 weeks of gestation. So Great Britain is probably the longest gestational age for pregnancy termination. Everybody else from looks like Greece all the way to Portugal is in the 12 to 10 week range. And the reason I wanted to show you this chart is because if the constitutional amendment passes that allows for termination of pregnancies up to birth, we, little Arizona, won't even be on that chart. We'll be way beyond that chart. We'll be a place in the whole world where that chart doesn't even apply. I think that's an important understanding, an important chart for you to understand. Okay, in Arizona right now, if you're 14 years old or you're 16 years old and you want to terminate a pregnancy, can you do it on your own? No. You have to have mom or dad's permission because whoever wrote the law said mom or dad needs to be involved in a decision that's this important. Informed consent. If you're considering terminating a pregnancy in Arizona right now, 24 hours before you do it, your medical doctor must give you informed consent. That's telling you exactly what's going to happen, what the risks are, and he has to do that in writing. You're also going to have to get an ultrasound, and you're going to be offered a transducer Doppler, a Doppler transducer. You're going to see your baby on the big screen, and you're going to hear your baby's heartbeat in the clinic. What happens to a lot of moms who see their baby on the big screen and hear their baby's heartbeat? They don't terminate the pregnancy. Coercion. Remember we just talked about sex traffickers driving their victims to abortion clinics. Can you coerce anyone in Arizona to terminate a pregnancy today? Under current law, you may not. And then partial birth abortions are strictly prohibited. I'm not going to describe them, but that's a good thing. They're too gruesome to describe. Okay, this is an important one, and I will tell you, before I retired and before Dwight and I got very active politically and civically, I ran a national company that insured physicians and hospitals all over the country. What this law said, and someone is thinking, is that if you have an abortion clinic and you're not near a hospital, you not only have to have admission privileges so you can admit through the ER into the surgical suite in that hospital, but your abortion clinic has to be within 30 minutes away. Why is that? Your hand slips during a procedure. The cannula slips through the uterus and causes a bleed out. You have got to get that patient into a hospital, into a surgical suite quickly to save her life. Somebody who wrote this law was thinking and understood the medicine of it. No abortion can be performed by webcam or telemedicine. Telemedicine and webcam medicine is big, and there are uses for it. But under Arizona law, who has to be present all the time in that clinic with the patient? A medical doctor. No nurse practitioner or physician's assistant can perform an abortion. Who do PAs and NPs report to? Very good, exactly. So they may report to medical doctors, but a medical doctor has to be there all the time. We talked before about sex trafficking victims being dragged into a clinic. If you are a crime victim and you're being coerced to terminate a pregnancy in Arizona, what's the first thing you can do when you're taken into an abortion clinic under Arizona law? Call law enforcement. You're protected in that clinic so that law enforcement can rescue you if they need to. If you are a doctor or a healthcare worker and your faith says, I don't want to terminate pregnancies, under Arizona law, can you stand on that faith? Are you protected? You are. Can you be fired for taking that position? You may not. You're going to be protected in that position. Clinics must keep accurate data and meet strict reporting requirements and report to the Department of Health Services. Guess what? Under the current law, no state taxpayer funds can be used to fund abortion. And no termination of pregnancy can be at a facility controlled by the Board of Regents. They're talking about colleges and universities because whoever wrote the law said we really don't want our colleges to be abortion mills. And then lastly, abortion providers are disqualified from the charitable tax credit. So this we put together for you to take home and take a look, because this is what we just talked about under the current statutes. And this is a little comparison about the proposed constitutional amendment, which in essence will reverse or negate or just leave out some of the safety factors that we talked about. So if you are inspired to do something about this, where can you go and where do you get more information and what can you do exactly? Well, the first thing you can do is there's a great website called itgoestoofar.com, meaning the constitutional amendment for most reasonable people allowing for terminating pregnancies up to birth is too far for most voters. So you can go to that website and find out more. Fully understand by reading the literature that a lot of the safety standards that are in existing law will disappear under the constitutional amendment, and we are very concerned that it puts mothers and babies at great risk. Talk to your friends. This is going to be most likely on the ballot. We have heard rumors that they have the 500,000 signatures. We don't know because we haven't seen it come through the Secretary of State. But inform your friends exactly what this is so that the title, Arizonans for Abortion Access, doesn't fool people and they're not fully cognizant of what's in the CA. And then inform your churches and your organizations so that they know what's happening. Okay, so let's have a little fun, because this is a very heady and hard subject to talk about on a Saturday night. And as I look out in the audience, I recognize a lot of people that I've seen so many times before, activists in the audience, and all of us are in various stages of seniority. Dwight and I travel around the state a lot and talk on these things, and one young person said to us the other day, listen, you know, you guys are getting a little up there. It's probably time for you to start following the signs to the you-know-what. They said, why don't you guys play a little golf or do a little knitting or let somebody else do it? And we said, well, we would go to the senior center. We would play golf and let somebody else do it, but we live on a street that's a reflection of our attitude about letting someone else do it, and that street's name is... I know, I can see out there that all of you live on the same street. I know you guys, you live on the same street. So guys, these are the security cameras in the 1960s, and your grandmas were not happy, but who are the security cameras today? It is us. We're the security cameras, and we are going to stand for what's right and what's good and what's honorable. So reach in your pocket and pull out your heart. I know everybody's got a heart, a big one. Okay, take your heart and put it on your own heart. And why are we doing this? Because there's a person in your life, a very important person, who is pro-life. And who is that? Your blessed mom. And so you're wearing a heart for your pro-life mom. And I'm here tonight to thank you and your moms for creating a room full of activists she chose to give you life, and that's what we're going to do. So guys, let's pray it and pay it forward. Vote no on any constitutional amendment that codifies abortion up to the 9th month, because here's the truth. It's not as much about a mom's right to choose. It's more about a baby's right to live. Thank you guys so much for your attention. And now I'd like to invite Representative Quan Nguyen up to talk. Quan Nguyen. Quan Nguyen is on his way up, ladies and gentlemen. Give him a round of applause.
Good evening. Just want you to know that the bench is a little short. I'm just a backup batter. So my seatmate Selena Bliss, fortunately, she's in New Mexico fighting fire for us. So I get to fill in. During the presentation that the KDARs, by the way, thank you for doing everything you've done for us as far as protecting our children, so I really appreciate that. So during the talk there, I pulled up a tweet from my opponent, which is the Clean Slate AZ-LD1 Democrat slate. This was tweeted April 24th, and it says, unlimited, unrestricted, and unregulated abortion access equals freedom. That the AZ Republicans disagree with this reproductive freedom. That was tweeted. They're not hiding it. So thank you for letting me be here. So I just wrote this last night, so I hope you guys are okay with this. When I think of education, I often think of reading, writing, math, science, history, and such. As a parent, I like to think that the public schools that I help pay for would provide a high level of education on the subject that I previously mentioned. As a parent, I have every right to know what is being taught to my children, what my children are exposed to while at school and libraries. So I'm open to having a discussion regarding access to intellectual freedom and access to diverse literature. But that being said, one of my main goals as a state legislator is to protect the vulnerable population, which is our children. So in 2022, and I was involved in the education committee actually. So during the 2022 session, we passed a couple of bills. HB 2439, it allows parents to access the school library book collection. That's number one. Number two, you can receive as parent a list of books and material that their child borrows from the school library. So you have access to that. You should demand it. HB 2495, a school is prohibited from referring students to or using sexually explicit material in any manner without acquiring parental consent. Once again, it is on you as the parents. It is not the goal of the legislature to limit access to certain materials in the form of censorship, infringement, or undermine the educational role of the libraries. So I want to make sure that you understand, as I stand here, there is no need ever for sexually explicit material to be in a section what your children can access. So collectively as a community, we should focus on providing educational resources that are conducive to learning, and explicit material will detract from this focus. We should establish clear policies regarding the selection of library materials, including criteria for age appropriateness. This will ensure transparency and consistency. Parents, parents, parents. It is up to you to be involved in the selection process of what your children are being exposed to. And it is up to you to carefully monitor your school and public libraries. Remember, the material displayed in your libraries is the direct reflection of who we are as a community. And I look forward to hearing from your views. So, that being said, it is now my honor to introduce Dr. Jeffrey Hansen. He has a pretty long list of accomplishments, so give me a couple of hours. He has a BA degree in psychology from the University of California at Berkeley, an MA and a PhD degrees in clinical psychology from the University of Arkansas. Completed a postdoctorate fellowship in pediatric psychology at Madigan Army Medical Center. Clinical director at Holdfast Recovery, staff psychologist at Madigan Army Medical Center, founder of the Center for Connected Living LLC, extensive clinical expertise in trauma and addiction, author of 4 books and numerous research articles, a frequent speaker in the areas of trauma and addiction. Dr. Hansen, please come on up. Thank you, sir.
Does that work? Okay, good. Can we get the slide deck up, please? So it's my honor to be here. What a marvelous introduction with comments about protecting from Andrea, protecting the unborn, and then Quan following up about protecting children. And that's what we're here to do, is protect our children. And it's an honor, Stephen Backus, thank you for organizing this. You're a rock star. I've had the opportunity to get to know Steve. He is obviously, as many of you know, a first responder, firefighter, saves lives, and now he's saving lives behind the scenes, and I have huge respect for you. You are the real deal. So thank you for making this happen. Thank you for having me. So I get in trouble because people have trouble when I hold the mic. I do this. So I mandated that I have one of these head mics. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, good. So let me go back one. So I have to do this. Sorry, I am not, I work in a military hospital. I'm not representing the views of the United States government. I also am not dispensing medical advice. If you have questions about a medical condition, then you must obviously seek a medical practitioner in the area of your concern. I have no conflicts of interest to report. I'm not being compensated for this presentation, although I did have a fantastic lunch thanks to Steve and his wife. So Jack Nicholson, one of my favorite actors in A Few Good Men, decries that we really don't want to know the truth. Can we get that, Kenzie, to play?
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Well done, thank you. Do we really want to know? I hope we do. I think everyone here does want to know. What a great crowd. Thank you all for coming. So my plan is to do a bit of a deep dive. We have a lot of slides to cover, and hopefully this will be a little bit more interesting than the 1,000 slides, the Smith's last trip, the boring slides to Europe. I'm going to scream through this at pretty high pace. The good news is that for everyone who registered, you will get a free copy, a digital copy of my book, Digital Enslavement. So it covers most everything in this presentation. And then we'll make a digital copy of the PDF as well. And you also can reach out to me if you have any trouble getting that. You can hunt me down at the end. I'll give you my contact information. So why do we care about the neuroscience of addiction? Why is that important? Well, porn addiction is a plague of our youth, and I would even say it's the plague of all adults as well. You know, about 80% of men are struggling with addiction. I would assume by virtue of the crowd here, that's not the case here. But if in the general population, yes, and even 50% of pastors. If we understand the mechanisms of brain addiction, it will tell us how addiction affects the brain's reward system and the neural pathways. This will inform us of treatments and also create preventive strategies. The bulk of my talk is prevention, right? If we get ahead of this, we can prevent it from happening. I would like to ask you, although I want your brains present, I want you also to listen to your heart. There's a new field of medicine called neurocardiology, and great things, great wisdom occurs in the heart. So if you could just kind of just slow it down for a minute, turn on your heart, and listen with your heart and the brain, because the heart always gets it right. And if we listen with our heart, if we bring our hearts to this presentation, to this talk this evening, we'll come out with a better way of coming together in a common path. So, in the words of Stephen Arterburn, I don't know of any plague to ever reach into the homes and families all over the world and create as much damage or heartaches than the struggle of lust, affair, pornography, perversion, and sexual addiction. It seems that everywhere I look, it gets worse and worse. The internet exploded the problem, and now cell phones transport pornography more portably than the computer and facilitates affairs with greater accessibility and secrecy. So, these are real cases of mine. I've seen boys as young as 11 attempt to rape 3-year-olds, one of my patients. I've seen normal adolescent sexuality be hijacked and rewritten from something wonderful to something perverse. I've seen teens attempt suicide over the shame and guilt of pornography addiction. I've seen a teen addicted to violent porn savagely attack and attempt to rape a girl he desired. It happened at school. I've seen men go to jail and lose their careers. I've seen countless marriages fail. The toll is incalculable, amounting every day. So our youth are in the worst mental crisis that the history has ever known. And we know this instinctively, don't we? And this crisis is undeniable and fully supported by recent research. And one of the culprits is right before us, pornography. Have we been sleeping at the helm? Have we been sleeping at the helm? So look at these statistics. Now this is from, you guys know Jonathan Haidt? Some of you do. I recommend everyone get this book. It's an amazing book. It's not a really religious perspective. He's actually one of the most prominent social psychologists in the country. And he just put out this book. But he pulls together several research studies from CDC and otherwise. But he postulates that it's really since 2010 that things have fallen apart. Look at that. Teen U.S. Suicides for boys up 109%. For girls up 134%. U.S. teens admitted to hospitals for non-fatal self-harm. It used to be that I would hospitalize a child maybe once every 6 months. When I'm actively at Madigan, it's often once a week, and sometimes a few in a day. So girls, 188% increase, boys 48% increase. That is staggering. That is staggering. And anxiety is the sort of the la maladie du jour. Anxiety is in some ways surpassing depression. But look at that in Gen Z. That's the caboose of the kids that are coming out today. Staggering increases. And it's mainly Gen Z, older kids and adults, not so much. Undergraduates diagnosed with mental illness, anxiety, depression. Anxiety's at the top. And look at this. The PISA scores, that's an international score that we use to measure academics across the world to compare countries. We're all getting dumber. We're all learning less. So there's Jonathan. And in this marvelous book, he says two things. That we used to have a play-based, for us older folks, we went out and played. That was our childhood. We learned, we took risks. To be healthy, you have to take a risk. But what do? We no longer let kids take risks. We protect them. We don't let them go outside. It's play dates, it's this, it's that, adult supervision. Playgrounds are different. They're over padded, they're over this, over that. And then we switch it out with a phone-based childhood. And that's the way kids grow up. We know this, right? And they don't have risk. But here's the thing. We over monitor them in play. We under monitor them on the internet. Free reign. The great rewiring of childhood, that's where it used to be. That's where it is now. And look at these before and afters. I want you just to let your heart, I'm not going to say much, just let your heart look at these pictures. Your heart will want to cry, won't it? Your heart wants to cry. Anybody in that family smiling? No. We no longer experience the real thing. The other becomes an image for me, and I am an image for the other. That's how we live. So, having established that there is indeed a mental health crisis amongst our young, let's turn out our attention to the leading culprit. Pornography and sexual addiction is being served to our youth. By the way, I had a little help with ChatGPT on some of these slides. Isn't it great? So addiction. Back in Roman times, addiction, when you owed somebody money, you got addicted to the family. You were enslaved to the family. And you had to stay with that family until your fine was paid. And if you couldn't pay it, you were forever enslaved. And so we borrowed that. Basically, we're enslaved not to a family, we're enslaved to habits. Yuval Harari, if you've never read any one book on depression, his book, Lost Connections, is a marvelous book. And you'll get all these books on PowerPoint. I have references on all of them so you can find them. But Lost Connections is an amazing book. But addiction is about bonding. And if you can't do it with people, you do it with a substance. Now, that might be gambling, media, cocaine, cannabis, pornography. You will bond to something because that's our nature. That is what we as human beings do. We want to connect. We are wired for connection. And the problem is we're connecting with the wrong things. So we initially love the addiction. And if anybody struggled with addiction, I had a point where I liked brandy, I have to confess. I was going through a really horrible time. And I love my brandy. But until it starts to take a toll, right? And then you have to answer to other things and other people. And I luckily got off of it. But people will tell you, I work at Hold Fast Recovery. And any addict will tell you that they love their addiction. They love their addiction because it takes them away from pain. Although we love the addiction initially, we become enslaved to it, like that earlier slide. So the 4 C's of addiction. There are various definitions of addiction. People like to say it's a brain disease. I don't believe it's a brain disease. I believe it's a pattern of behaviors, etc., that lead to diseased brain. But it's not really a primary disease. It's more of a secondary disease, and that has implications for how you take responsibility for it. So these core brain, 4 core changes. 1, craving and preoccupation. You crave it. Loss of control. You keep doing the behavior even though your life is falling apart. You have a negative consequences. You stay with it. And then it becomes compulsive in nature. And we'll discuss some of the brain changes that make this understandable. So these are my favorite authors. Jonathan hates that last one that I just showed you. It's very good. I'm not going to play these, but when you get the slide deck, I encourage you to go listen. Take 10 minutes on each of these next 2 slides and listen. This is, in this case, Delafe. He's actually a pastor's son. He did not get into addiction because of trauma. He got into addiction because it was just fun, and it just destroyed his life, and he almost killed himself. Suicide is a final pathway for many people who get enslaved into addiction, especially pornography. This next one, and I found John Deloney by accident. He's a marvelous talk show host, but a college student calls in, and if you listen to this, you won't be able to stop because you get a completely excellent understanding of what he was going through and how it completely destroyed his life as a college student. So let me go first. When I was a young man, back in my day, it was Playboys and whatnot. I grew up in that culture. I took that into my marriage, and a couple of years into my marriage, my wife says, "You stop this or we're done." So I'm not taking this, I don't want to shame anyone, but I feel it's only to be authentic. Many of us struggle with addiction. I liked pornography when I was younger. I grew to hate it. And happily, very early as a young man, I was able to get away from it and never return. So, how bad is it really? It's pretty bad. 40 million Americans struggle. 35% of all internet downloads. 35% of all internet downloads in the world today are pornography. It costs about $17 billion annually. 1/3 of porn users are women, and actually increasing. Women are catching up. And actually, girls who view addiction get addicted more quickly at younger ages than boys do. We don't really understand why, but they just do. 9 out of 10 boys and 6 out of 10 girls are exposed to pornography before age 18. 90% of teens, 96% of young adults are either encouraging it. What we're seeing here is that the attitudes for pornography are changing. And everybody's, and I shouldn't say everybody, far too many, especially kids and teens, they're very accepting. Their attitudes are changing. So if you at a young age are very accepting, now we have a real problem. I have to keep changing that. It used to be 12, average age of exposure. Then it was 10, now it's 8. And parents in my practice will tell me, well, not my Johnny, and then I see them confidentially, and yes, Johnny's looking at pornography. You may think they're not, but they are. And if they're not exposed at home and you're doing a great job at home, they're getting it at school. And those first shocking images completely jolt the autonomic and the central nervous system. 83% of boys, 57% of girls are exposed to group sex, and then 32%, 18% of girls are exposed to bestiality. That's horrible. And then they're also seeing child porn. And of course, that gets legal ramifications, doesn't it? So let's explore some of the causes of pornography addiction, the impact of trauma and pornography use, and then we'll talk some about the way out of pornography. Is that okay with you guys? So, Ted Roberts, anybody know Ted Roberts? He was a fighter pilot in Vietnam, and then he became a pastor, and then he got his PhD. He's an amazing person. He must be pushing 80 something. He founded Pure Desire Ministries, has done so much in the help of pornography addicts. But let's talk for a minute about guilt and shame. Guilt is about what we've done. Shame is about who we are. With guilt, we can always get a fresh start. With shame, we are caught in a noose because the problem stays with us. If you are struggling with porn, or you know someone is, or a child, whatever, never shame. Shame is a very low amplitude emotion. It's very toxic, and excess shame starts to kill the body. I don't want to get into too much of that, but just please never shame. It just makes it worse. So always in love, always in love, always in love. So trauma, sexual addiction, and specifically pornography addiction are often triggered by trauma, but not always by trauma, but we're going to talk about trauma some. Excessive dopamine demands on the dopaminergic pathways and poor self-regulation worsen addiction. We're going to talk about that. And there's a relationship between the brain, the nervous system, and addiction. You guys are going to be all trauma experts by the time I'm done with you. And you'll be dopamine experts, and you're going to know a lot about glutamate, a lot about cortisol, and a lot of things. And there will be an exam at the end, right? Not to worry. If there's too much content, you can get the slide deck, you can get the book, and go over what you want. And I don't want you to try to absorb all this. What I want you to do is leave with an appreciation that pornography affects the brain, and pornography affects the body. And in so understanding, then we can start to take it much more seriously. There are those who want to say that pornography is not an addiction just because it's not in the DSM-5. And the DSM-5 is rubbish. That's what we use to diagnose mental illness. It's really not very good. If you go to my website, you'll see what I think about it, which isn't very much. So, trauma, it's thought, can lead to mental illness. Mental illness can lead to addiction, but it's bidirectional. So addiction can lead to mental illness, and addicts, if they're doing enough of their addiction, will traumatize themselves. So it can go every which way. So let's talk a little bit about Felitti. You ever heard of the ACE research? He was a family practice physician with Kaiser, and he was trying to understand why addiction, he would working with obese women, and they would drop out of his clinic and gain their weight back. So he was very good about getting them to lose weight, but once they dropped out, they gained it back in. And as he then went back and interviewed them, he found that most all these women had substantial trauma. And when you address the trauma, they can keep the weight off. When you don't address the trauma, they can't. What's that? I didn't hear that. Oh, it was a slide, sorry. So, yeah, there we go. Thank you for catching that. I think that was me. I think I was pressing the button. But anyway, trauma causes profound deficits in emotion regulation, and then it overwhelms our ability to process incoming information. And that's basically the adverse. Most family practice docs and pediatricians are giving children and young adults the ACE studies. But basically, if you hit on too many of these adverse child experiences in childhood, you will traumatize the body. And emotional abuse and neglect are the key ones that cause problems. And then we differentiate between big trauma, kinds of stuff that Steve deals back, and fires and whatnot, people getting horribly burned, big trauma. And then little trauma would be the developmental issues, such as neglect, abuse, etc. Now this is amazing. As the number of insults in childhood increase, so do all these horrible things happen. When you have 4 of the traumas, right, in childhood, 1,220% chance increase of attempting suicide. But look what happens when you have 7. It goes to 3,100%. So trauma in childhood sets the body up for all kinds of adverse effects, including health effects. Look at the increases of intravenous drug use, and then chronic depression, and then work output. So it's devastating to our health. So how does trauma impact the mind, body, and soul? The best contributor to that question is polyvagal theory. Anybody heard of polyvagal theory? You're in for a treat. Stephen Porges, he's amazing. And that's old Stephen. He now has a son, Seth. Stephen's kind of boring because he's a scientist a bit like me, but his son Seth rocks it. And they just put together a book, it just got published a couple months ago on polyvagal theory. It's amazing. Don't listen to Daddy Steve talk about it, listen to Seth. There's some YouTube videos and he just rocks it. But basically, our autonomic nervous system is our personal surveillance system, and it just works all the time. And if you can't figure out what's threatening and who's threatening, what happens? You get hurt. Maybe you die. So every living system, animals, humans, no difference, we all have this incredible ability to assess threat. We're always, and it's an unconscious process, that unconscious process is called neuroception. So you can just impress all your friends, I'm neurocepting you. I'm checking you out. So we do this all the time, and it's unconscious. But you'll find yourself reacting to people, and you want to know why. Because your system has already made an assessment, is that person safe? And then we also can get into neurocardiology and heart rate variability. We also pick up on that too, but I'm not going to get into that here. So a little bit of just fast forward physiology. right? We have the sympathetic system, right, like this, and we have the parasympathetic system like this, and they balance each other. And the sympathetic system is the part of the system that activates us, and it gets us ready for battle, for fighting, for fleeing, right? The first step of that is the adrenaline, and within about 100 milliseconds that reacts. If that doesn't work out, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, big fancy word, just think HPA, kicks out cortisol. And really, you don't even worry about that. Just realize that the sympathetic system is God's design, the universe's design to keep you safe and get ready to go forward to battle, right, and defend. So this increases heart rate, it releases stored energy, muscular tension. It also shuts down the digestive system, works very fast. Now there's the parasympathetic, the other side of this, all right? So the parasympathetic system, that conserves and restores. It calms, it moves to homeostasis, which is a balance. There's 12 cranial nerves, and the 10th one is a beautiful one. Oh, it's beautiful. It's called the vagus nerve. And the vagus means wanderer. It wanders from the lower brainstem all the way down, hits the organs, and then it goes back up, it hits the facial nerves. So basically, it's bidirectional. It's amazing. So this is God's design, the universe's design to help us regulate. And you're going to see, and you're going to know something that most physicians don't talk about, most psychologists don't talk about, is that, let me go back, the parasympathetic splits. So you ever seen a possum freeze and run over one? We all seen that, right? That's the dorsal vagal nerve. It's a very primitive part of that nerve. It's not myelinated. Myelination around a nerve means it's very fast. The dorsal vagal nerve is very ancient. It's very slow. So a deer will freeze, a possum will freeze. When I was in Somalia one time, I had a soldier in his second firefight in one day. He froze with his M16 in his hand, wouldn't give it up. He was in a dorsal vagal shutdown. His body was just doing what it thought it should do. And these responses are not conscious, they're unconscious. They're very quick. Now the other side, that's our friend. That's the vagus nerve. That's myelinated, which means it has an insulation. It's very fast. And when we're in that sympathetic, if we're in massive defense, we're going to go dorsal. We're going to shut down. If we go ventral, we're going to connect. God designed us, the universe designed us to connect. And to go to defense, we must do, then we must be able to come out of defense. Isn't it cool how that works? It's just amazing. So, I love this chart. This is developed by Rothschild. There are many models of this chart and how it all puts together, but this is the best one. The green zone, the blue zone, that's where you want to be, that's where you want your kids to be. That's where we live, that's where we restore, that's where we learn. If you take that brain to school, you will learn. But if you've had too much trauma, you're going to live in that activation state, or you're going to live in the shutdown state, or you're going to live in both. Right? So you can associate that with anxiety, rage, terror, panic, all the uppy stuff. This one's all the downy stuff. So you have body states, then you have emotions. Think about that. Body states, because where does trauma store? In the body. Bessel van der Kolk, trauma always stores in the body. And if you can start to understand this, then you can get keys to how to get out of it. Really important to understand it. And when people, I work with a lot of first responders, I work with a lot of vets, combat vets, etc. They get in these states and they're terrified. And when you don't know what's going on with yourself or your children, it's terrifying because your body feels like it betrays you. It's not betraying you, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do, but if you can understand it, it's not terrifying. Now you begin to have a map out of it. Make sense? Okay, so we need to be able to go to these states, we just don't want to stay in them. When you have a child who's been in these states too long, it wires in. By age 3, it's 70% wired in. Isn't that amazing? By age 6, this is 90% wired in. So it gets really, really fixed. So if this is why we need to pay attention to our kids being connected and safe, right? And pornography messes all this up. So you can have trauma, which will mess this up, and then pornography will take you to these states even more. You get the daily double. right? Just additive. So trauma will cause a developing child to live in autonomic defense states, the uppy one and the downy one, right? And if you're there for far too much of the time, it just wires in. And then we go to addiction to quell the pain. Bad people do not go to addiction. Morally deprived people do not go to addiction. Hurting people do. Anybody heard of Gabor Mate? Beautiful man, traumatologist, lives in Canada, but he wrote an amazing book. But he says, we don't ask why the addiction, we ask why the pain. And you will not help a person through addiction if you don't go to their pain. Make sense? You will not get a person out of addiction if you don't go to their pain. So trauma is much about the loss of connection to ourselves, to our bodies. Why? Because we're not in the green zone. The green zone, the ventral vagus is firing. We're connected. Trauma takes us out of that. We become alienated to ourselves, to our bodies, to our families, to others, and to the world around us. Without connection, can you heal? Nope. So people get depressed, people go to these trauma states, and they isolate, they die. They die. They don't get through it. And by the way, you can be living biologically and be dead in other ways. Now, I have to say that a lot of people get an addiction just because it's fun. It's not about trauma, it's just fun, and you see a lot of kids going to school. They don't necessarily have trauma, but Freddie shows them some porn and they love it. And they go back and they're just having fun with it. And dopamine starts running and they're off to the races. So how does the brain become addicted to substances or behaviors in the first place? And these guys are marvelous, so you can click on and listen to George Koob and Dr. Kevin McCallie. Kevin McCallie actually used to be a flight surgeon, got addicted after a surgery to OxyContin or one of those, destroyed his career and went to prison. And now he's in Arizona working in the meadows. He's an amazing man. And it was so open about his story. So he's just an amazing man. I kind of like this slide. I'm just going to let you look at the slide for a while. Isn't that kind of cool? I'm done. See ya. No. So, the three amigos. Dopamine, glutamate, cortisol. Mentioned those earlier, right? Now, dopamine is a really cool chemical. People think that dopamine is the only thing about enjoying things. It's not. Dopamine is about reward salience and moving towards things. Glutamate is about learning, and then we have all the secondary reward mechanisms, and that's going to make more sense to you in a second. So dopamine, specifically how much dopamine, so if you have an activity like porn, so shocks the body, dopamine spikes higher than a kite. And so the more reward salience, the more it spikes dopamine, the more you're likely to get addicted to it. So dopamine, as many of us know, is the feel-good neurotransmitter that's the most critical, important part of the addiction process, but it's not the only story. Now, for you guys who want to be like really smart, right, and just impress people, say, well, dopamine is not just a neurotransmitter, it's a neuromodulator. What's the difference? In the brain, we have neurons. You have a neuron, and you have a synapse, a space, and then you have another neuron. Dopamine travels across that. Neurotransmitters go across that, right? So they fire an axon potential, lets a chemical go across, dopamine, fires the next neuron. Then you have a neural net firing. As a neuromodulator, you get a massive dopamine dump in a big area of the brain. So if it's on a neurotransmitter level, it's fast. Neuromodulator, it's slow, but it lasts forever. So dopamine is a big deal to the brain. And it's not just with seeking reward. Dopamine is implicated in thinking, moving, sleeping, mood, attention, and motivation. It does a lot. Imagine then, if you have an addiction and you're messing with this neurochemical, you've destroyed your life. You destroyed your life. Did I do it twice again? No, I'm good. Okay, so just a little bit more neuroscience of dopamine. It goes slow in the brain from the BTA to the nucleus accumbens to the prefrontal cortex. That's the path of it. And natural dopamine activities the brain loves. So when we make love, we have intimacy, dopamine rises and it falls beautifully. Then you have oxytocin, some other wonderful chemicals that happen in the brain. But when you spike it, unnaturally, you hijack the brain because the brain doesn't know how to deal with that. So the brain's, again, kind of stupid. The mind's wonderful and brilliant, but the brain is a machine. It's tracking how much dopamine's going across. It doesn't care whether it's good or bad, but it goes, okay, a lot of dopamine's running here. This is important. This is a life thing, right? This is a survival thing. So the brain will think dopamine is survival. It thinks dopamine, or it thinks addiction, or porn, whatever, is survival, okay? So the more dopamine, the more it thinks it's survival, and it wires it in. How does it do that? Oh, this is just, let me just, before I answer that question, dopamine is about wanting and going forward. Without dopamine, you don't do anything. You can take a rat, ablate the dopaminergic pathway, give it its favorite meal. What's the rat going to do? Starve to death. If you put the food in its mouth, it'll eat it and say, yummy. So when you take out dopamine, you take out any motivation to moving towards anything. But dopamine is about wanting and moving towards something. It's not so much about liking. Liking comes after it when you get opiates. But here's the thing. This helps you understand addiction. The drive to dopamine is stronger than the final reward of it. The opiate system is not as strong as the dopamine system. So you're wanting it, but you're not liking it as much. See what a trap that is? I bought that bike. My brother bought the Diavel. That's my granddaughter. She just visited. She's 11 now. Isn't she cute? But anyway, I got that bike, which is a beautiful bike. I love motorcycles, but I love my granddaughter more. But my brother got the Diavel. I wanted that bike. So we work hard for something, we get, then we want something else. Isn't that nuts? So, delta phos B is, again, what I want you to get out of this is we're changing brains with pornography. We're demolishing the brain the way it's supposed to work. Delta phos B is a transcription factor. Basically, it's a lock-in switch. Just think of it that way. It's a lock-in switch that makes epigenetic changes to the way the brain's working. That's bad news. Epigenetics can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing. It can save you and it can kill you, and it can go both ways. But delta phos B is a really tricky thing, and it's something you don't want. You want to have it lock in good behaviors. You do not want to have it basically lock the system in. Now, the body's always trying to protect, so then we have Krebs, which tries to slow it down. So you have a brake and you have a gas pedal. Which one do you think's stronger? The gas pedal to go for it or the braking system to stop? It's the gas pedal. So you basically think of a car and you have two wheels that are rolling, and the other two wheels have brakes. You're just going to go around and around. That's what it's like to be in addiction. You can't stop. So this nicely shows, this is one of my favorite slides because it really shows what happens in the brain. This is normal dopaminergic flow. When we find something we like, and naturally it increases, which is cool, right? And that's not bad. But if you run this too hot, what happens? The brain starts pulling out the receptors. It pulls out channeling. It channels out dopamine, and now you have a deficit state. And in that deficit state, you're doing everything to get back to a high, but you never do. Best you can do is there. So what happens to the child porn addict? What happens to the adult porn addict? When you're in that state, what do you have to do? You have to go to the next highest level of porn. And you never get back to enjoyment. You just get back trying to get back to baseline, so you're basically in a deficit state, which makes the body feel horrible. Just quickly to show you that we need the whole brain to manage behavior. When you run too much addiction, the prefrontal cortex is the don't do it part of the brain. It shuts down. It can't control the impulses and shut it down. So basically we call this hyperfrontality. These are the addicts that I see at Hold Fast Recovery. If you gave them, and I showed them this slide, I said, you guys know, if I gave you your substance of choice right now today, you wouldn't be able to say no. And they said, that's right. Because that part shut down. It takes time for that to heal. So any child, any adult steeped in pornography, eventually hyperfrontality will set in. You cannot say no. You want to say no, but you just can't. You can't inhibit that. So this slide just shows the blue one, dopamine, raises porn raises dopamine about 250%, about the same as sex does. But look what happens. It stays up. We don't really know why that is. I mean, you can kind of guess. It's so shocking to the brain and so pleasing in some ways, it just hangs around. And it hangs around, that causes problems with getting over it. So glutamate is the #1 excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. This is what I want you to get. And now you're making a secondary change, because what does glutamate do? It excites the brain, but it also stamps in memory. It helps you memorize that addiction. So you have dopaminergic channels that have changed, neurotransmitters have changed. Now you have glutamate. So all drugs of abuse and many addiction behaviors affect glutamate, which preserves drug memories. It kind of passes through the hippocampus and the amygdala. Those are important regions of the brain for determining salience and also memory. And then the excess glutamate spills out in the synapse to bind to extrasynaptic GLU receptors, changes in synaptic plasticity. Don't worry about all the gobbledygook neuroscience language. You're just changing the way one of the most important neurotransmitters of the brain works. But we're not done with it. It starts to do damage to the brain. So we're going to just look really quick at astrocytes and microglia. Astrocytes, we used to think that glial cells, they're the support cells in the brain. We thought they were just kind of space fillers. No, they're really important. They bring nutrients to the brain, to the cells, and when you start to mess those up, they're not doing it like they should. And especially the microglia, they look at, and they're looking at molecular patterns of pathogens. They're also looking at damaged parts, and they go and munch things up. They're cleaners. So we call it macrophages, and they go out and just eat up bad stuff, right? Well, when you have excess glutamate, and one little side thing, it takes about 2 hours for them to clean up the brain. Every 2 hours they clean up the brain. That's amazing. You don't want the brain to not be cleaned up, otherwise you got a lot of junk, right? So when they munch the bad guys up, they're supposed to go off and commit suicide, apoptosis. They blow themselves up, right? When they're overexcited, they don't blow themselves up. They just go around and do more damage, which causes inflammation, causes the brain to be all messed up. So the takeaway here is you don't want to mess up glutamate. You don't want to hypermemorize that addiction, because it makes it really hard to get over the cues, right? And cues addiction, what does people in pornography or any other behavioral or substance addiction. Then you also don't want that excess glutamate to start damaging your brain, because then it's not going to work for you well, and then you get sick. And the byproduct of this is inflammation is the final pathway to death. We know this because of COVID, right? Inflammation. Cortisol, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on cortisol, but basically, as I said earlier, you have your SAM, your adrenal system figures out adrenaline. If that doesn't work, then you got cortisol. Cortisol is a killer. It's great for long-term stress to a point. So when Steve Backus is out on a fire, he better have a lot of cortisol, and he better have some left over for the next fire. But if there's a next fire and a next fire and a next fire, now he's got too much cortisol. And cortisol starts to degrade your body. It goes after every organ and will just take you out. So cortisol is great in limitations. When you can't regulate cortisol, what does the brain do? It loses its governing capability, right? So a little bit of stress, you have a little cortisol, a little bit more stress, a little more. It just conserves and shuts down so that it's in a conservation mode, and then when you have any stressor, boom, it goes up. So you're either flat or furious. And people who have dysregulated cortisol, firefighters, police officers, vets that I see, soldiers, they're either flat or they're furious. And they'll just almost not lifting, and they're just completely activated, right? And then we have things like PTSD. So just a word about the HPA axis. Obviously, it hits the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal, but it regulates stress response, mood, digestion, immune system. And when you're under massive cortisol, what happens to the immune system? It shuts off. Now you're prone to disease, right? That's what killed so many people in COVID. We took them to isolation. their immune systems dropped, and then when they got the thing, they died. So a bit about teens, since we're talking about kids. Why are teens so susceptible to addiction in the first place? For those of you who are parents, that should be a Bible on your nightstand to help you understand teens and younger kids. It's an amazing book. But basically, that's probably an infant neuron, that's probably close to my brain. But anyway, as you grow, you get a lot more dendritic connection and connectivity. And this is pretty amazing. When you start off in life, all through childhood, most of childhood, you have 200 billion neurons. And when you hit adolescence, you're pruning from 200 billion to 100 billion neurons. Isn't that amazing? So think about it. The brain is going, okay, we need to clean things up. Adolescence is a time to have the final growth spurt in the brain. So let's get rid of the stuff we don't need, and that's wiring the stuff we do. It's a way of making it efficient, right? So if you're doing, and this just shows how the, basically you're looking at more white cells, right, or myelinated. But you use it or lose it. So if you're doing stupid things in adolescence, what wires in? Stupid. And if you're not doing math, the brain goes, well, we don't need those circuits, let's get rid of them. So you're wiring in stupid, and you're cutting out smart. Now, hopefully, you're wiring in good stuff, and you're cutting out stupid. But that's not the way it goes for kids that are addicted to pornography. It doesn't go that way. And to succeed in life, you need lots of executive functioning, and that doesn't happen in teens. If you imagine that these kids don't get the critical input of executive functioning, they can't function. So we know that there are about 100 studies that show that pornography harms. Now we're going to just kind of switch gears here. Adding to the damage that pornography does to the brain, it shrinks brains, it slows down working memory, it decreases gray matter. So it's frightening that you don't even have to be addicted to porn, but rather merely using it begins to change the brain, and you thought it was making you dumber. It is. Addictions make you stupid. This is a shocking slide because it shows how when you run any addiction, you have more dendritic connections, pieces. They want to absorb that chemical, that behavior, right? So you're changing the structure of the brain. We don't think this reverts back. Much of the brain, when you recover from the addiction, repairs. This doesn't. So you're always prone and susceptible to relapses. It's one of the hard truths about addiction. So the good is the child brain can learn like nothing else. The brain can prepare more quickly. The bad is the developing brain will wire an addiction faster than the adult. And for every year before 25 that a child or a young adult does that addiction, increases the likelihood by 8% that will be a life addiction. So it really behooves us to ensure that our kids are not getting this addiction in the first place. So we know that addiction to pornography causes changes in the body, metabolic syndrome. So we're seeing kids with metabolic syndrome like lots. And we didn't used to ever see that. It's kind of an older person's disease. And metabolic system increases risk of diabetes, heart disease, and stroke. We're seeing lots of diabetes, of course. And it's not just because of addiction. It's a lot of other things, diet. So pornography promotes hyperarousal. It connects the brain typically into that activation that we looked at earlier, right? And then we have blood flow shifts. So as you're stressed, nature doesn't want you to think much. It just wants you to react. You go limbic. So you go from frontal to limbic. That's what's running the show. So addict brains are limbic brains, or lizard brains. They're not using higher order thinking much to manage their life. And manage being a child and going through that when you have to learn. As I mentioned earlier, you don't get the executive function that you need. So you also have oxidative stress. We need antioxidants to clean out the brain. You lose that. So again, it just makes a point of having more and more problems. So how are we doing on time? Got about 40 minutes, okay. So my relationship, this is a really just shocking story about a young man, A.N. Turner. It's a marvelous book. My relationship with the internet was not alleviating feelings of loneliness, but was amplifying my loneliness, bringing me to a state of frustrated depression. I felt boxed in, unable to breathe, trapped in an inescapable thought bubble of my own effed up addictive desires. I conditioned myself to need constant stimulation. These are our kids today. These are our kids today. I couldn't read, talk, study, or play the piano. All things that I love, all because it all seemed too slow to one note. So things that used to be pleasurable no longer are. And those of us who are doing too much media, too much, all the stuff that we do on our phones, it's getting us too. So, on the surface level, we're the most connected society that's ever walked the planet, but because of all these tweets, 69,000 texts a second, etc., we are the most disconnected society that has ever walked the face of the earth. And remember what I said, if you're not connected, your body starts to degrade. Many, many studies, I'm not going to detail these, show the link of excessive media and depression, and pornography and depression. And I would like, Kinsey, could you show this? Could you start this clip? Just click out of it and click back in. I think we figured out that would work. Perfect.
Turn Signal with Kim Troby.
The evening before his execution in 1989, serial killer Ted Bundy sat down for an exclusive interview with Dr. James Dobson. Bundy took responsibility for his actions, but he blamed pornography as a key factor in the killings of at least 35 women and girls.
I've lived in prison for a long time now, and I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception.
Bundy requested the interview with Dr. Dobson because he had watched him serve on the Attorney General's Commission on Pornography. He trusted the focus on the family founder to convey his warnings accurately.
What a guy, huh?
And what scares and appalls me, Dr. Dobson,
yeah, you can
is
click out.
when I see what's on cable TV, some of the movies, I mean, some of the violence in the movies that come into homes today was stuff that they wouldn't show in X-rated adult theaters 30 years ago. This stuff...
The slasher movies that you're talking about.
That stuff is, I'm telling you, from personal experience, the most, that is graphic violence on screen, particularly as it gets into the home to children who may be unattended or unaware that they may be a Ted Bundy who has that vulnerability to that predisposition to be influenced by that kind of behavior, by that kind of movie, that kind of violence.
Daniel Weiss with focus on the family actions.
Chilling, isn't it? So the argument that I would make is that not every child is obviously going to become a Ted Bundy, but if you have vulnerabilities, it can make you worse. But his point is that people that really do bad, violent things, pornography is not the key, but is one of the keys. And then we have good old Jeffrey Dahmer, heavy drinking, pornography, and masturbation, admitting that in the U.S. Army he found graphic porn in Germany and spent thousands of dollars on it. So I'll skip these studies, but basically, pornography teaches, gives permission, and eventually triggers attitudes and behaviors that are destructive to both the user and the others, and the damage is evidence regardless of sex, age. It is a very toxic teacher. Our children are learning about sex from pornography. And you think you may be teaching them, but if you're teaching them and they're seeing pornography, who do you think is going to win? Who do you think is going to be the major professor? It's going to be pornography every time, because it's so salient. It grabs the brain. So the verdict's in. It just attitudes, conductive sexual aggression, engage in sexual acts of aggression. It just absolutely triggers that. Take a look at this slide. I'm seeing sexual arousal disorders in children, and actually teens as young as 14, 15. And between 1948 and 2002, the historical rates of ED in men under 40 were constantly around 2 to 3% and did not go up very much until age 40. However, Gary Wilson found in 2014 at least 6 studies, and anybody who works in this area as much as I do, it's true. It's about 14 to 33%. 14 to 33%. in young folks, which constitutes a 1,000% increase. In another Canadian study, this group reported erectile dysfunction at 45%, low sexual desire at 46%, difficulty climaxing at 24%. These kids, some of these teens get to that state and they want to take their lives because they just feel like they're ruined. It's just absolutely terrifying. We know that pornography affects our sexual appetites, and men and boys, they will tell you that when we had, remember that down-regulation slide, the 3 things? They get to that deficit state, they go to the next level. Sometimes a homosexual man will go to heterosexual, a heterosexual will go to homosexual. This is not popular, but I'm going to say it anyway. This will get me in trouble. But in terms of transgender, I did write a book on this topic, so I'm very much a transgender in terms of children, early affirmation caution. I believe that transitioning children when they don't understand informed consent is the wrong way to go. And the medicalization, thank you. And the medicalization of children who don't is barbaric. And when you look at what happens to these children, it destroys their lives. It absolutely destroys their lives. So pornography is not the vector. I'm having to say it's the main vector to transgender issues in children, but it's one of the vectors. And pornography often exaggerates and distorts gender roles, contributing to confusion about gender identity and expectations among viewers. This is true, and I've seen this. The violence against women depicted in porn may trigger some girls to transition to make or to escape the threat in search of safety by becoming even more male-like. And there's Erin Brewer was raped brutally as a child. She's an anti-trans for children activist, and she transitioned or started a transition. She didn't go all the way. She now has children actually, but she said it's because I was raped, and I didn't want this to happen to me again, so I wanted to be a boy. Not popular. We also know that pornography objectifies women. Interestingly, women who do porn, it also causes them to objectify other women. Isn't that interesting? Basically, women are treated like objects, and one of the reasons why is when you have normal relational connection, intimacy, you get that beautiful chemical, oxytocin. What does oxytocin do? Helps you connect, right? It's designed to help you connect. Well, when you're doing and masturbating to pornography, you don't connect with anything other than maybe yourself or to the computer, whatever you're viewing. So it doesn't complete anything beautiful at all. It just leaves you feeling very empty. So it does affect the soul. I don't think bad souls get into pornography, but I think pornography does affect our souls, so to speak. It affects us on a spiritual level. It distorts human dignity. It impacts spiritual growth, effective meditation and prayer. So I just wanted to just think, again, in terms of shame and guilt. Bad people don't get into porn, but porn helps you become a less than good person. Okay, this is going to get me in trouble, but I'm going to do this anyway. Steve and I debated whether I should do this. I was in, I was out, but the ideological pathway to addiction, or to the sexification of children, rather. Good old Karl Marx, right? We all know about Karl Marx. Well, for Marx, the fundamental human problem was comprised of 2 things. You had the oppressed, right, and the oppressor. We're all into that today. And it was all economic. You had the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, and then you had the proletariat, which were the working class. And I kind of agree with this. It alienated you from, when capitalism hit, your connection with the act of production, the product made, and from other workers and from his identity. So those aren't so bad in a sense. But when you force people into that, that's bad. And when you make everything that, that's bad. But classical Marxism failed, didn't it? We have about 100 million, maybe 200 million rather, dead people, as it can testify that it didn't work, it was a failure. So then we tried to understand, or various people, good old Antonio Gramsci was an Italian dude. He's kind of a sickly guy, and Mussolini didn't like him much and threw him into prison. He wrote the prison notebooks, But he basically hated the church, and he felt that the church was the reason why people were holding on to old beliefs. So he said, instead of a frontal attack, let's take them out slow. And let's try to understand how we can take over the church, and then we can capture and infiltrate culture, and I think many of you know this, by taking over churches, schools, media, police, judicial systems, civil services, schools, and the very school we're in. They're capturing it. And he coined the term hegemony. And hegemony is basically the Greek word which refers to the dominant classes. So basically, anything that was old is bad. Now, let's be honest. Some old ideas are bad, and some old ideas need to be changed. But do all of them need to be changed? Well, they throw the baby out with the bathwater. They want to change everything. And then, of course, you have guys like Rudy Deutschke, who also known as Red Rudy, who referred to the long walk through the institutions. That's what we're seeing, a cultural takeover on every level. It sounds conspiracy, but it's not. And then we had the old Frankfurt School, who basically critique of social structure and capitalist societies. And they thought to identify the underlying social, economic, and political dynamics of the societies. And then we had one of my more infamous guys, Herbert Marcuse. But society of existence where the freedom and happiness themselves are at stake, here there are certain things that cannot be said, like this wouldn't be popular, what I'm saying. And this is right out what he said, this is a quote. So certain ideas cannot be expressed, certain policies cannot be proposed, certain behaviors cannot be permitted without making tolerance an instrument for the continuation of servitude. It gets worse. This clearly paved the way towards a suppression of any opposing view. In medicine, freedom of speech does not exist. I'm sorry, it doesn't exist. COVID taught us that. And me saying this will probably get me tar and feathered. But I don't care, because I'm going to speak the truth. Nobody's going to silence me. And we shouldn't be silenced. We should stand firm in what we believe. So, Marcuse helped pave the way to lay the foundation for the left suppression of opposing views in his classic treatise in 1965, Repressive Tolerance. The essential argument, according to Marcuse, is that because the existing system is tolerant by the left standards, true tolerance requires suppression of ideas and movements from the right, his words, not mine, and acceptance of any of those on the left. That's where we're at. That's where we're at. This last stat is probably going to be in the most trouble, because this is where the real, I'm saying, I won't say the word. Anyway, I won't say it. But queer theory began in the 1990s, but it goes way back to people like Michel Foucault. And you talk to anybody from university, they worship the ground Foucault walked on. He's a French freak. And I used to live in Switzerland. My mother's Swiss, but I love that part of the country, but I don't like Foucault. And he was a genius, but he was an evil genius. And the story behind him is he loved to have sex with boys, and a lot of people came out in Tunisia, as young as 11. He died of AIDS. Good riddance. But he went on to, where is he? There he is. So, French philosopher, he challenged anything heteronormative. So think about it. Heterosexual, whatever, is bad, right? Like, I'm not a male, I'm a cis male. So we have these labels to sort of pejoratively the normal. So he believed that all norms are bad. So again, some norms are bad, some sexual norms are bad, and some need to be changed, but not all. So this is the problem with these progressives, is that everything, it's all one or the other. And shockingly, Foucault went on to advocate and sign a petition in the French Parliament arguing for the abolition of all legislation regarding the age of consent or the effective legalization of pedophilia. That's a fact. They tried to throw it out, but it's not just that. You think it's just over there? Check this honey out. Now, Judith Butler, people love, she's from my alma mater, still there. But Judith, I'm not going to read the second paragraph, because if you read it, you don't understand it. She's the queen of gibberish. She makes no sense. And so you kind of go, what are you saying? But if you really dig deep enough, she is for intergenerational sex, the adoption outside of marriage, and also oppose the legal restrictions against interfamilial sexual abuse. I'm sorry, it's true. So, the pathway to sexification of children has been nicely paved, and we need to be aware of this. We need to fight this. Create a new ideology that, under the cloak of making us all equal, forces us to accept that ideology as defined by the man defining that ideology, and if you refuse, you are destroyed, even killed. That's classical Marxism. Pure and simple. Appreciate that the new way of thinking, in order to more fully take root, must change every aspect of a different culture by capturing the institutions. That's hegemony per Antonio Gramsci. And there are other people in here too, but I'm just keeping this simple. Disrespect and criticize every foundational cultural tradition or mores. That's critical theory, as promulgated by the Frankfurt School. And then finally, turn upside down common sense sexual behavior and legitimate the perverse. That is queer theory. Queer theory has nothing to do about being gay. Queer theory has everything to do about capturing our children and destabilizing them, and then the schools can take over and continue that identification. And they talk about drag queen family hour. That's a lie, because they really are against family. And they like to see it's a wolf in sheep's clothing. And we should not be putting up with it. We should not be allowing this. So I guess it's good that we kept this in, Steve, huh? So all right, taking position against sexualization of children and pornography can be dangerous. Good friend of mine, he and I co-authored a book a few months ago. He's an MD, PhD from Johns Hopkins. He's a strong Christian, amazing. He's an ophthalmology surgeon, also aerospace medicine dude. He's like got an IQ about 12 billion. He's amazing. So he wrote, took a position against pornography and wrote about a paper on erectile dysfunction. They tried to take him out. They tried to destroy his career. Absolutely were after him to destroy his career. And they were so successful in it, they got him banished to Okinawa for about 3 years. But he's so smart, he was able to finally make captain. He's a naval captain now. He's now in Pensacola. And Gary Wilson, who wrote an excellent book, Your Brain on Porn, is one of my favorites. And I love Gary. Gary and Andy were friends, wrote books together. They didn't write books, they wrote some chapters together. Well, Gary got attacked by the same person that attacked Andy. It destroyed him. He took it so personally. It just destroyed him. He tried to defend himself. He got legal counsel. And he died of AIDS shortly thereafter. Andy and I both feel that it just completely demolished his... I mean, I can't prove it, but we think he was so destroyed he couldn't fight off COVID. He died. He shouldn't have. And lest you think I'm left out, Josephine, who I agreed to an interview, and I said, Josephine, if I interview with her, I knew she was going to try to catch me on conversion, which is the number one thing they like to do to try to take away your license, is they conflate, and she conflated in this article against me that conversion, that treating people with pornography addiction, which she doesn't believe exists because the stupid DSM-5 doesn't have it listed, I am committing conversion therapy. I guess maybe because these kids would end up transitioning, and somehow if you treat the pornography, they're not going to be, I don't know. Her thinking is so screwed up. She holds no degrees to my knowledge. She's certainly not into neuroscience. She certainly is not educated in neuroscience. But she's gunning for me and makes kind of innuendos about my license and whatnot. So I'm in her crosshairs. We'll see where that goes. So the way out. If you did nothing, do these 4 things. Do these 4 things. Jonathan Haidt. I could almost close here and we'd be halfway home, right? For God's sakes, no smartphones before high school, age 14, no social media before 16, phone-free schools. Lock them up. Lock them up. And much more, going back to his earlier slides, we don't have play. Get kids playing again, right? And then make schools porn-free by keeping porn out of school libraries. For Pete's sake. I mean, that's common sense, isn't it? It's common sense. So, how you guys feeling? I can zip through this really fast, cut it short. What do you guys want to do? Keep going for a few more minutes? So we'll go for a few more minutes, then we'll end it. And the good news is that what I don't cover, you're going to be able to just take a look at it yourself. If you leave with what you've gotten from now, I'm happy. But there are ways through this and way out of this. Going back to Johan Hari, actually I wrote him a letter, and he wrote me back. And I'm just a fan of Johan Hari. But basically, healthy living has got to be the foundation. Healthy, connected living. And then there are ways, once you start down the freeway, you have to make turns. You have to turn off that freeway. Online help, self-regulation skills. So, just to zip through this, in Johan's book, he covered 8 areas of disconnection. If you have any one of those, you can become massively depressed. He was a young man. He was a half Swiss like me. He was very depressed in his childhood. Went on about a 3-year study around the world because he had lots of money, very successful journalist at the UA, came up with 8 points. If you want your child to be free of pornography or any other addiction or be healthy, if you want us to be healthy, you have to be connected in meaningful work, in meaningful people. You have to have good social connections. So work would be like being successful at school, being successful at home. We need to be productive in doing things, and you don't get participation trophies. You actually have to do it. So people, and this is about that vagus nerve that we have designed in us. Without that vagus nerve firing, we're neurologically very, very at risk. And when you're lonely, cortisol levels go through the roof. You have a 2 to 3 times more likelihood of dying if you're lonely. Check this out. Air pollution, 5% increase. Obesity, 20% increase in dying early. Look at loneliness, 45% increase. And that's why old people die. They get isolated and they die. Core values. When by families, I think that as families, I'm sure that the exception would be here, but we don't talk enough about our values. We don't talk enough about what we believe in. Kids will, I ask, well, what do mommy and daddy believe in? What are your values? They don't know. You need to teach kids values. Trauma we covered. The only comment I want to make here is, in order to have self-respect, you have to do something. And yes, we want to love our kids unconditionally no matter what, but you have to accomplish something to feel good about yourself. We lie to kids and say, good, I like the way you're breathing. That does not make them feel good. It makes them feel worse, because now they can't trust you that you're telling them the truth. You're telling them they're wonderful when they did something horrible. You always should say you love them, of course. You never withhold love. But this thing that we get participation trophies for doing just nothing makes kids worse. Nature, kids today are not getting out enough. Again, they're in with their phones all day long. We have a nature deficit disorder. Nature, the 2 cool colors, blue and green, they actually regulate the autonomic nervous system. Lots of that out here, right? You have to have hope. And I think faith, if you've ever read any of Lisa Miller's work, she's actually not Christian. She's Jewish, I believe, but faith is neuroprotective. If you have faith, you're 4 times less likely to be majorly depressed. You're 4 times less likely to die of suicide. So faith is insanely neuroprotective. Of course, nowadays, what's the main faith of children nowadays in school? Atheism. Atheism, and they all say they're atheists. That's popular, right? And that's neo-Marxist. So, if you start thinking about an addiction, you start thinking about porn, you're already dripping dopamine. You have 3 seconds to get out of there, 3 seconds to shut it down, then it'll become a deluge, then you'll drown in dopamine, and then you'll produce a dopamine deficit. So these next slides I'm going to skip through really fast, but basically there are triggers. You have the emotional response, you have the first thought, you have the chemical release, you have the body language, and then you have the battle. So all these things start to cascade, and the metaphor that Frad uses is the earlier you can get the off-ramp off, the faster. the better you are. If you wait too late, it's going to run its course. And once you're into that final battle, hyperfrontality that we talked about earlier, now this part of the brain's not shutting it down, and you're stuck. So we need to be aware of strategies like online support. And I'm going to jump to Trish Lee is the best in the world, in my opinion. Now, she is amazing. I don't know that she has any particular faith. She's a marvelously mother of 3 children. She's a clinical psychologist, has a lot of background like dude. She also does a lot of neurofeedback, which I don't do. But if you don't look at any one of these, but only look at one, that's the one to look at. Trish Lee, you can Google her, find her. She's linked there. She's amazing. I could spend an hour on this, but remember I said the body is out of whack. It's not autonomically balanced. So the old strategies of learn how to breathe, learn how to regulate, be in the moment, live in the moment. You have to teach kids how to do this. So it's basically a learning style that they're going to hate. Why? Because they're running dopamine up here, and these things run dopamine in a beautiful way, in a natural way, but to switch from this to this is going to be absolute terrible for them. You have to get the phones out of their hands, you have to get the phones out of their bedrooms, and you have to get them into life, right? And then in so doing, learn the regulation skills. One comment I want to make, you can do all the breathing in the world, but if you don't bring positive emotion into it, it doesn't work. So there's a whole field called, I mentioned earlier, neurocardiology. It's basically if you do deep breathing and a longer exhalation than inhalation, but then to go to something you love, go to something you appreciate, right? Whatever is good, whatever is lovely, etc. Remember that verse? Think about those things. The peace of God will rule in your hearts. So when you go to positive emotion, the neural system loves that. The heart goes into a beautiful, nice sine wave and heart rate variability. If you focus on negative emotions or no emotions, it doesn't do that. Negative emotions, it goes no regulation at all. The sine wave is lost, but in positive emotion, it just settles beautifully. So think gratitude and love as you deep breathe, right? And beautiful things can happen. And lastly, as I alluded to earlier, you cannot get out of addiction, you cannot get your children out of addiction unless you're connected with them. And what I see more and more is, I see addicted parents trying to help addicted children, which means we have to look at our own cell phone habits, our own media habits. Put your cell phone away. Put it away, charge it up, do not leave it in your hand, do a show, do a game, whatever, but keep the phone away from you as much as you can. An addicted parent will never help an addicted child. And let's face it, we're all a little addicted to these things. Come on, we all are. So, I realize that when you're a hammer, everything can seem like a nail, okay? So, being a clinical psychologist, I've seen the worst of the worst. I've seen lives destroyed. But the elephant in the room and its evasion must not be ignored. I urge you to save your own mind, body, and soul. If you are not afflicted with this plague, please reach out and help someone else. Together, and my favorite word, connected, we can do this. Thank you for your attention. Great audience. I know it's late. I think we're going to, then I have to introduce the wonderful Eric, right? You're going to come up and dazzle us. He's with Turning Point. Take it away, buddy.
Well, man, was that something. Wow. Incredibly impressive. You know, I have to say, I was raised by a Marine Corps veteran, and then also raised by a therapist or a counselor. And so you can imagine that kind of balances each other out a little bit, right? But I'm gonna say a couple things real quick on the topic before I get into Turning Point Action. I'm only gonna speak for a couple minutes because we're gonna have a panel of discussion and have Q&A. And so I highly encourage you to stick around. I know it's a little bit late, but I do encourage you to do that. Is there anybody in here who's in Generation Z? Okay, so I'm the only one. That's okay. Generation Z, okay. I'm gonna say something. And I've actually never said this before on a public stage. I've said this before to some folks, but never on a public stage. Generation Z, I think, is probably the most over-sexualized generation I think we've ever seen. And people say, well, how? Right? And, you know, I mean, I think that Dr. Hansen really covered a lot of it. But I think another aspect of this is the hookup culture that's in our generation. You see, I'm 20 years old. I'm only 20. I know I look a lot older than that. Trust me, I work in politics. Politics ages you, believe me. I get it, right? I'm out here looking like I'm 30. I get it. It's okay. It's okay. I'm only 20 years old, and dating in this generation is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult because nobody wants to have a life of Christian values. Nobody wants to have a life of morality. And so I would say that, yeah, I think hookup culture is the worst in this generation I think it's ever been. So I'm going to get into where we're at as a country and what Turning Point Action is. I mean, you've heard everything that's happening, everything they're pushing in our schools, everything they're pushing in our education, and what they want to do. What they want to do is they want to get a hold of our children. So that way, right, they're hooked on the government. They're hooked on their smartphones. They're hooked on everything for life so they can easily control and manipulate them. That's what the globalists want. That's their playbook. That's their agenda. That's what the Marxists want. It's true. And so I don't know that I really have to remind you with what's at stake here. Right? I mean, we could talk about the younger generation, or we can talk about the fact of what's happening on our border. We can talk about the fact that what's happening with our economy. Right? I come from the People's Republic of Maricopa County. I'm sorry. And, you know, I have to say, growing up in the state of Arizona, I've seen how much it's changed. You know, I was born and raised in the North Valley, more in the North Phoenix area, and I've seen how much it's changed. I've seen the homelessness rise. So what is Turning Point Action? Turning Point Action is the 501c4 organization of Turning Point USA. Anybody heard of Turning Point USA? Yeah, all of us. There we go. I hope so. So Turning Point Action is a sister organization to Turning Point USA. We do all the political stuff, right? So you have Turning Point USA, who is on the high school and college campuses, and they have Turning Point Action. And what we are doing is we are building out the most robust, conservative ballot chasing operation ever. No conservative organization has ever done this. We're hiring people like never before. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to win this thing this year. We're going to win it. But we need everybody. We need all of you. We can't do this alone. We need everybody to ensure that in their precinct, in their neighborhood, that every Republican shows up to vote. I'm going to tell you a couple stats here. Did you know that 300,000 registered Republicans in the state of Arizona did not vote last year, or in 2022? Did you know that 50% of Christians didn't vote in 2022? 50% of registered Republican Christians. The number one demographic of people that didn't vote in 2022 was moms. After everything that we just talked about here today, I think that we need moms showing up in droves to the polls more than ever before. And this is where we're at. We're building out these different coalitions to ensure that everybody votes, because how else are we going to save this country? Look, we have to flood the system We have to make sure that every single person votes, right? Because, yeah, election integrity is a problem, right? But do you really think that if they thought that they could do what they did, right, in 2020 and 2022, you think they wouldn't have just thrown Trump in jail? They're afraid because I don't think they can do the same thing. Right? And they want you to be afraid, but I don't think we're afraid. Are we afraid? No, we're not afraid. So, ladies and gentlemen, we need you. I'm going to tell you a story, and then I'm going to bring up everybody back up here for the panel. I'm going to tell you a story. There was a boy in junior high school, and this boy had a teacher who would sit down for the Pledge of Allegiance. So the boy goes up to the teacher, and he says, why do you sit down for the pledge and the national anthem? She says, personal reasons. And the boy looks at the teacher and says, you're being very disrespectful to every single student in here. All of the family members, the family friends who have fought, served, and died for you to have the freedom and for us to have the freedom to do what we're doing. And so the teacher sent him to the office. And then, the principal said, there's nothing that we can do. And so the boy goes back to the class, and then, days go by. She starts sharing political views. He starts debating her. She sends him back to the office. He has this weekly meeting in the principal's office. Until one day the principal said, when are you just going to stop? When are you going to stand by, fly under the radar, and just mind your own business? And the boy looked at the teacher and said, not till she quits or gets fired. Now, I'm not trying to beat my own chest here, but I was that boy, and we need more people like that who are in politics. We need more people like that who are going to show up to the city council meetings, show up to the school board meetings, have our voice be heard. Ladies and gentlemen, your voice can be heard, but you have to activate it. You have to put it into action. You have to actually do something about it. You can't just sit on the sidelines and let everybody else just, they'll figure it out. It's up to each and every single one of us. How much is freedom worth? Is freedom worth an hour to you? Is freedom worth an hour? Is freedom worth 2 hours to you? I really hope it is. Because it's worth a lot more to me. A lot more. And so, for any of you that have questions, we're going to do the Q&A here. I'd be happy to answer any of them. And then we have our Turning Point Action table in the back. And so for anybody that's looking to get more involved, please come and visit the table after. But for right now, I want to bring up everybody else back on the panel, and then we'll get this Q&A going.
I'll take questions over here. It's kind of hard to crawl over everybody. Is there any questions at all? None? Going once? Twice? Wrap them up, Eric. No questions. Great job, presenters. I guess you were very thorough. And, we do have a question. We got one question. Come over here.
No, go ahead. Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys very much. Really appreciated your time. I'm a local dad, have 2 boys, 13 and 8. Agree with a lot of the sentiments about the over-sexualization of younger kids, the generations growing up right now, people early 20s. Showed up here, same spot, stood and spoke when the library book issue was brought before the town council. Went the next week and saw library books that were inappropriate on a front display. Really felt honestly quite defeated by trying to do something and it not panning out. Had two boys locally in a Christian school here, decided this year to pull them. That was basically an effect of seeing inappropriate behavior between children not being handled by the administration. So my question, to make a long story short, is what would be the best plan of action for somebody that shows up, uses their voice? I've done this many places. I've done it at the state, getting the hands-free law passed. I did it here, getting bus aids put on our school buses when I was a bus driver. I know the importance of showing up and speaking. I've seen it have an effect. But my question is, what is the best plan of action when you don't see the result come from utilizing your voice in an effective way en masse? Because my plan of action that I can tell best, in my view, is bringing in my wagons into a circle and keeping my kids safe under my house by monitoring closely when I see a failure in the supervision or the administration of the mechanisms that are supposed to keep them safe in places like a Christian school. So it's a complicated question. I don't do a good job maybe of articulating, but I'm just wondering what the plan of action is when you feel like you fall flat on your face multiple times in a row. You keep trying, but is there a better way to try, I guess is what I'm asking.
Well, what I would say is, I might be the wrong person to ask because I resent the public education system. But what I would, and so I have a question for you. Is, and this is on the school board, correct?
I met at the school board, town council level, and then also talked to the principal level. The school board at the Christian school is an open forum, so it's harder to reach them.
Okay, and are these people on the school board, are a lot of them up for re-election this year?
That's a great question. I'm not sure where they're at in their tenures.
Are they, yeah, I mean, are they elected officials? It's not a public school.
I speak specifically about a Christian school, so I don't know if it's more of
Got it.
like a local parent vote that goes into it, or if it's more of an appointment. I'm not really sure. But yeah, at the actual public school level, that's certainly elected.
I see. Well, I mean, what I would say is it's everywhere, right? I mean, it is in charter schools, it's in private schools, it's in public education, and the best thing that we can do, I think, number one, my personal opinion is pull your kids out of those schools. I would say that's the first thing. Because, I mean, they're indoctrination camps, right? The second thing I would say is this is why we need to, and I know that he's referring to a private school, but I mean, this is happening everywhere, and this is another reason why we need to rally around the school boards. We need to rally around all these different places and organize, right? I mean, this is a community here, right? This isn't like Phoenix. I mean, Phoenix, nobody knows anybody, everybody flips everybody off, nobody's happy, right? I think it's a different story up here. And what I would say is that this is where we communally organize, and this is where we apply pressure, and November's right around the corner, and I think we vote these people out. And look, we have the tools and the resources to do that. And so that's what I would say. Does anybody else have anything?
So I want to share a little story that I had today, because I was at an event where you get to move around, you have to answer questions. It's called speed dating for answering questions from constituents. And I got to one table, and that table has a school board member. I hope, is she here today? You have a school board member? Right. So thank you. There was a school board member asking me, so what do you do at the legislature? Can you help us drop some bills, create some bills that actually would get rid of some of the crazy curriculum at the school? And she is an elected school board member in Prescott, and I happen to be living in Prescott Valley. And I said to her, ma'am, it's your job. You're an elected school board member. It's your job. And she looked at me and she said, but can you help us out by drafting legislation? No, ma'am, it's your job. You got elected to be in total control of the schooling, the school curriculum at your district. And what I believe is, as a state legislator, I don't want to get involved with local politics because politics is actually local. It is her job to do her job. And she said, well, they're not listening to me. I'm sorry, it's your job to make them listen to you. Because guess what happened? I'm a Republican, I got 31 to 29 Democrats. I can't go to you and say, please help me, because they're not listening to me. You'd be laughing me out of a job. So it is our job as elected officials to do what we're tasked to do, number one. Number two, don't be afraid. Stand up, speak up. If you have to yell, you guys should go to my committee sometime because I'm a chairman of judiciary. I put down every single Democrat on the daily basis. You have to. So go back to your school board and say, what are you doing to help out my kids? So being a parent, I'm sorry, can I take a little bit more, about 30 seconds? Go. I will tell you, when I have two children, 125 and 129 now. They have never had a weekend when we weren't fishing or hiking or being in Yosemite National Park. I kind of grew up in Central California. There's no cell signal in Yosemite. There's only Dad and the fishing poles. That is it. And I spent 5 years, and this gentleman would attest to it. I spent 5 years at the gun range with my daughter, traveling to Ohio for competition. There is no cell phone signal at Ben Avery on the firing line. And that's how you do it. So, yeah, and so this is what happened to the current group of parents. I'm not criticizing anybody. All I'm saying is that when I recruit for the Arizona Scorpions with 15 national titles, the minute I mention you have to be on the gun range at 6 a.m., the parents walk away. I can't help anybody. So we, as parents, are responsible for some of the behaviors that's happening now. That's all. I'm going to get off my seat.
That was absolutely right. You're talking about time, you can't cheat it. Can hear you. Yeah, there I go with the mic again. But you're talking about connection. And when we're not connected with our children, their whole neural system develops differently. I mean, you're just living proof of that, so good job.
Kwong, I just want to be clear, you're not talking about Lori Drake. She was not that's not the board member you were talking about. All right. Lori, can I give you a shout out? Go ahead. Come here, Lori.
I can say that the sexually explicit, when you did the legislation on the sexually explicit books, that was extremely helpful because it came at a time when it was just starting to come through Mingus. And it was overwhelming because when I went to our superintendent the year before and said, you know, everybody's asking me about queer theory. Do we teach queer theory? Do we have a queer theory class? I would think no, because that's not something that we would do in this school. And the overwhelming answer from administration was no, we don't do that here. So I believed that we had nothing like this in our library. And we have our board change. And you should know that when you're a conservative sitting on a school board and the rest of the board is not conservative, you can fight every single day, but you don't gain any ground. And you can get as many people in the community to show up, but it doesn't change anything. So if there's anybody in here that hasn't pulled a packet yet and complains, go pull one. Because I can tell you right now, when I pulled mine 8 years ago, I was just a mom sitting at meetings saying, I don't like what you're doing with the money. And I can tell you every day, I learn something new about where the money goes, why it goes there, and how the legislature has decided to do it for us. Because I like that it gets to be local control, but it's not as much a local control as it used to be. But I can tell you the way it is now, stand up, because I'm just over in Cottonwood at Mingus, and I can tell you that these things are here too. And it was so hard to get people in our community to come to our meetings and to stand up, and we have so many people that did, so many great Christians, so many just incredible community members, but it's hard to grab back those reins when you finally get some more conservative people on your board, because it takes time to work forward, and it takes time to have contracts end and to be able to hire people that are in for the education model and that want to educate your children and want them to go higher than the state standard, because that's something that we don't seem to look for all the time. This is the standard, and it's okay. But I want above and beyond. So I do thank them for everything that they try to do every day. The sexually explicit material is horrifying lately. I had copies made for our board meeting, and we weren't allowed to put them out. So that's the hard part. But every day, stand up, because I can tell you there's not a lot of people running for these positions. You can say vote them out all you want, but the people that are running are the people up behind them that are going to decimate education.
So I want to respond to that a little bit. Even Republicans actually will bring back some of the more liberal ideas. And I'm glad this guy's here, because he holds everybody accountable, all Republicans. And I remember in 2021, I was in the Education Committee, and a Republican brought back the bill that would say, let's reintroduce foreign language. I mean, teaching by foreign language back into high school. And I spoke up against that. Why? Because if I didn't have immersion English, I wouldn't be sitting up here with you, right?
Right.
And so I was the only Republican spoke up against it. But I'm going to tell you how one voice can actually make a change. When the bill actually is an HCR, it actually got to the third read, the final reading. It was 51 yes, 59 yes to 1 no.
That's wonderful.
59 yes to 1 no. And to the credit of Senate President Karen Fann, she watched the board, and the only guy voting no for nothing other than English in the classroom is the guy that actually had to learn English back then. So I hit the no, and Karen Fann never put that bill up in the Senate side. So one voice makes the difference. So you need to do the same thing. You need to go to the school board and voice and yell and scream. Well, just don't get tossed out. But you know what I'm saying? It does make a little bit of a difference if you're logical and you can stand up and defend it. And I'll tell you this. There was a gentleman, it was COVID, so he was testifying on the monitor. And he said, you have to do something because we have 93 different languages in the state of Arizona. You people in education have to do something. And all I was, Madam Chair was terrified every time I do this, because I don't talk much, but when I talk, it's kind of a problematic thing for the committee. So I say, sir, let me ask you this question. What are you going to do about the 5 Cambodians, the 2 Ukrainians, and the 1 little kid, a Laotian, in your math class? What do you do? And he held his breath for 10 seconds, and I thought he was never going to answer. And then he answered, I don't have an answer, sir. If you don't have an answer, don't bring stupid things into education if you don't know the answer.
I'd agree.
And that's what we have to do. We have to call them out, because they want to play the game. Oh, but we got to take care of these immigrants. They don't speak English. You know what? I learned how to speak English in 6 months. I didn't have a choice. Either sink or swim. And we got to teach all of our kids to do the same thing. If it's an immigrant, my wife is a school nurse, took care of a Ukrainian kid that came over here with no mom and dad. 6 months later, he was speaking fluent English.
That is wonderful. No, I thank you guys. And it's not that I don't thank you, and I just, when everybody says vote them out, I do want you to know when it comes to voting them out, most of the time you're voting someone worse in. I mean, I can tell you what our election stuff looks like when I decided to run for supervisor and leave my position.
So then I think we need to have somebody in this room run.
I like that. You know what? You can still pull a packet. I can send you the information. It's ycesa dot, is it? Yeah, .com. Yeah. You can make your appointment with Jen Nelson over in Prescott, pull a packet, run. I think for Camp Verde, you only need 44 signatures. Come on, guys. There you go. I love it. Oh, absolutely. So I have been on the school board at Mingus for 8 years. I decided this year to not run again, and I am running for county supervisor for District 3. It is not your district, it is the district Cottonwood. And my name is Lori Drake. So there's 2 Dems running in my district, which I still find amazing. I grew up in this area. I even married a Camp Verde boy. But I've only lived in a county that was red, and I find it interesting that we're living in a county that's purple. So thank you guys for what you do. But get out there and run.
We got some folks over here who have some questions, so I want to get over to them.
Dr. Hanson, I want to thank you for the presentation. As someone who has struggled with pornography addiction, everything you said up there is true. It is the crack cocaine of the internet. My name is Matt Johnke. I'm running for the Camp Verde School Board. And my question would be, and this can go out to any of you, how, we teach our kids in school how to do math and how to do other things, and we teach them about diversity and equity and inclusion and gender confusion and all of this. Why can't we, or how do we, incorporate a class that teaches them the dangers of pornography, and that the best solution is to never, ever see it?
That was awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate your being so candid. And I can't answer that question because I don't know how to really get the cultural Marxist thinking out of the school, other than calling it out and going to board meetings and saying it for what it is. So to me, yes, we need to have pornography addiction education in the schools, but at the same time, if you're having teachers, principals, counselors that are promoting queer theory, promoting critical race, there's like not enough space for it. So I just think as much as it's not popular, we have to be calling this stuff out.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to try to do my best to help stamp that out. We tell our kids to say no to drugs, but in my opinion, pornography is way more harmful than drugs and way more addictive. Thank you for all you up there. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Johnny Sheely, and I have a question for the lady on the far end. I'm sorry, ma'am, I forgot your name. You were talking about abortion, and one of my jobs for Safeway when I worked for them was an analyst. And the thing that I'm proposing here is, and I think it's correct, that when we talk about abortion and the way the Democrats look at it, it's a way to change a nation. When women years ago said they would like to do this particular procedure, the Democrats didn't see it that way. They look at it as if you get rid of the people that are born here and they're not going to be taught the things that are dear to us, then we can change the country. Am I correct in my assessment? And some of their, in other words, this thing is far more nefarious, I believe, than where the dust and the dirt meets the road, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. And let me tell you something really interesting. I wish I could have a copy of this to show you. The Arizona Free Enterprise Club, and a lot of you know Darla Gonzalez, the grassroots team, Fox News, Bloomberg, several other pollsters came together and did a poll on what's driving Arizonans to the ballot box. What do you think the number 2 answers were for Republicans? No, let's do number 3. 1, 2, and 3. What do you think 1, 2, and 3 were in terms of driving Republicans to vote in November? Take a guess. Immigration, economy, crime. What do you think the number 1 thing was for Democrats? Abortion. Abortion. Now, you know, you can say that the Democrats are up to a lot of nefarious activities, but abortion is the thing that's really driving them, and they're not calling it abortion, they're calling it women's health, they're calling it reproductive rights, all kinds of, you know, vernacular that's meant to create a come hither for generations that are, you know, younger than us. I will tell you, in Arizona, this is what the polling shows. The polling shows that many Arizonans want some restrictions on abortion, but they don't want abortion outdone altogether. I'm virulently pro-life. So when I give a presentation like that, I have to keep my own opinions to myself, because what the Supreme Court said when they turned over Roe v. Wade is they're going to send it back to the states and you get to decide. That's the way it's supposed to work. You're not supposed to legislate from the bench. So, you know, if we in this room who are pro-life from conception think we don't have our work cut out for us, we do. Because most Arizonans like a gestational age. They think that is fair. And that's why when we talk about this presentation that I gave, the existing law is the law that I think a lot of Arizonans feel comfortable with. What we try to stress in this particular presentation is that the Democrats, Planned Parenthood, and the ACLU are the one pushing this constitutional amendment to codify Roe all the way up to the 9th month. It is their baby.
There's one other thing I want to say. I'm not from Camp Verde. I'm actually from Rimrock over by Lake Montezuma. And I'm probably going to tick a lot of people off, but I want to say one thing. I looked up when they had their school board meeting, and I decided to show up. And I did. And there were no parents there, not one. It was just the school board council, nothing. And they were talking about ordering iPads in this, and, you know, do we approve this, blah, blah, blah. There was nothing said about rules and regulations about these iPads and what we're going to allow the students to have and how we're going to govern these things. You know, if you don't show up, nothing's going to happen. And there was nobody there. And I did that a couple times just to see what was really going on.
Hi, my name is Mary Ann Dellinger, and I'm running for school board in Humboldt. I wanted to thank Dr. Hansen, even though it's the trifecta from hell, Foucault, the Frankfurt School, and Gramsci. I have a PhD from ASU in Spanish. I also have a background in education, and that's where I began to make the connections. In education, we don't have so much Gramsci and Foucault and Derrida, although we do have the other, right, which comes from Derridian theory. But we do have the Latin American literacy movement, which was started by Marxists in Brazil, very much successful in Cuba. Everybody can read in Cuba. We have a much higher literacy, a lower literacy rate here than they do in Cuba, but Cubans can't think. They can read, but they can't analyze everything, and they're told what they can read. My question to you is, I believe the problem that we have in the schools is teacher education. My analogy is that we have hemlock in our garden, and the root of the hemlock the root of the hemlock is teacher education. It isn't DEI, it isn't, SEI, SEL, CRT. Those are all based on all that stuff. All that comes from Gramsci and Foucault and Derrida and all those people. So my question is, and I hesitate to use the word, but how do we retrain teachers when they come out? What do we do? How do we handle professional development when the state is putting in what they can do for the CEUs? Because we definitely need to retrain them. We need to desindoctrinate them. And I wondered what ideas you had about that.
Can I run? Can I run away? That's a great question. I think once you drink the Kool-Aid, it's hard to undrink it. And I think you talk about retraining. We have to go to the universities themselves, and we have to turn the universities upside down, because the universities are the ones that are poisoning our teachers. So once you get snake bit, it's like the, what's that show, the zombies? You turn and you don't come back. So I often think that sometimes arguing with the person who's been radicalized, you got to get to the source of the poison itself. So I think, yes, we should try to bring them back where we can, but we have to go to the universities that's training them in the first place. That's where it's starting.
I would say to that point too, I would say to that point too, because this, I did a whole tour on the history of critical theory, critical race theory. They have 7 different names for it now, alphabet theory, whatever you want to call it. And, this has been in the education system since Herbert Marcuse got kicked out of the Frankfurt Institute and came here, right, and mentored Angela Davis. And then, I don't know if you guys saw, but recently Angela Davis found out that her family actually came over on the Mayflower, thought that was interesting. So her whole life is crashing down right now. She's realizing her whole life is a lie, which is hilarious. But, the thing is that absolutely it's coming from the colleges, right? And it's a drip down effect. The problem is that the teachers believe it. The teachers want to push it, right? It's not like, it's not like you have, George Soros, which, you do, but it's not fully him. It's not like you have George Soros that's just controlling the whole thing and putting a gun in everybody's head and saying, you will teach this. It's George Soros and all of these other globalists are funding, right, these universities. They're funding these people, right? They're funding the superintendent of public instructions across the country, really and across the world too, because we're seeing this in Canada big time. We've seen this in Canada for a long time. And essentially, indoctrinating people in colleges, and then those people that are indoctrinated in colleges are moving on to the high schools and the grade schools, and they're pushing it. So it's a drip down effect. The problem is they believe it. So once again, it all comes down to college. I think that a lot of people are waking up. I can tell you, I didn't go to college and I'm doing fine. And I think that people are waking up, they're realizing that you don't necessarily need college, right? I can tell you the amount of people, thank you. The amount of people that I went to high school with and grade school that went to college, got a degree, either dropped out or got a degree in gender studies or business, they're like working at Subway. Or they're working, and they're not using their degree. And I don't mean just to degrade anybody here, but they're not using what they spent $60,000+ on, right, and spent 4 years at a university partying their life away and sleeping around. And so the reality is that we have to get back into those colleges. There are good professors. Liberty University has, Liberty University in Hillsdale, the number of people that are trying to get into those schools is jumping up big time. And so I think that we're seeing a change. And another thing, I want to give you guys some good news. A recent study came out that says that 75% of 18-year-old males graduating high school are registering Republican at the 75th percentile rate. So people ask me, you know, what are we, you know, how is Generation Z reacting to it? I think we're rejecting it, and I'm starting to see a culture that's changing a little bit. And so, you know, the females I think are a little bit of a different story. We're working on them. I have a whole philosophy, you know, because conservative men aren't going to marry liberal women. It just doesn't work that way. And so they're going to sit there and be like, where are all the strong men at who are going to protect me? Well, the men that you know, affiliate with don't own firearms and don't believe in them, so I wish you luck. So I think they're going to change in time, but I mean, you know, my generation my generation of males are starting to wake up, and we're seeing that.
I just wanted to add one more thing to what you said because of Angela Davis. I recently saw a coloring book called Radical Feminism, and it has Angela Davis on the cover. Angela Davis killed somebody besides being a radical feminist. So it's not only the books on pornography, but there are a lot of books that exalt Fidel Castro. There are books that exalt murderers like Angela Davis. So while we're looking at the pornographic books, please let's look at the ones with the covert political message too. And I'd be happy to talk to you about my research is on that.
Ibram X. Kendi.
Thank you.
Look out for Ibram X. Kendi. If you see any book that says the anti-racist baby, how to be an anti-racist, how to train an raise an anti-racist, I mean, might as well train, how to raise an anti-racist, all that stuff. Ibram X. Kendi, he's one of the biggest Marxist authors of today. Very dangerous individual. His ideologies are very dangerous, and he's gaining a lot of traction. So he's another person to look out for. Thank you.
So, Pastor Brian Wattenbarger, Camp Verde Christian Church, and I don't have a question for you guys. I want to thank you, each and every one of you, for coming out today and making this very educational, very wonderful. My question, though, is for out here. How many here are pastors? Any pastors in Camp Verde? You're a pastor? That's right. Okay. And so one other, so we got two. How many elders? One. The other one, he left, and you're both in my church. So let's not forget that the point is saving our children, right? And it becomes a matter of where does the problem start? And we know it's a systemic problem, and it's based, as has been stated, on which group's in control and people fighting over control. And we have people, and you all love the community, right? I can tell you all love this community. One person loves this community. Okay, there's the rest of it. You're here, and we're hearing what the problem is. Voices aren't getting heard. What was it you said, 300,000?
300,000 registered Republicans, yeah.
Didn't vote. Well, we've got to deal with it, and it starts right here in our own backyard. And what used to be the center of the community, and for Republicans generally still is, the church. Where's the rest of us? Because we're all here. What is the body for, people? It's not just to gather and make each other feel good. It's to gather and hold each other accountable. We all own a part in this, and it can't just be up to the pastors, but we do need the pastors to step up. You're part of that body. Get your pastors involved. Get your elders involved. And get your peers in the body involved. If you want to change the problem, it starts with us. Kwong was able to change something just with one nay vote. That fine lady over there is going to change something, but she needs your guys' help. She needs your vote. Matt's going to need your vote. By the way, he's got mine. Get the churches involved, and you'll see a change. Because we still have a lot of numbers in the churches. But these communities rise and fall with the state of the churches. Don't let your churches slip. Hold them accountable. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
Hey, just to add to Brian, I was in charge of the marketing end for this event. I did the best I could. And knowing some of these data points, correct me, 50% of registered Republican Christians are not showing up to the polls. They're not voting. I knew that. And so I really tried to get out there and market to that audience, knowing that is the heart and soul and the moral compass of a community. I spoke with many pastors, not all of them. So my challenge or my direction to you guys is go and talk to your religious leaders, your pastors, and ask them, hey, were you at this event? Did you get tired and leave early? Why weren't you there? Did you not know about it? I mean, we made this thorough for a purpose. You know, we were accused of being rah-rah ralliers, and clearly we're not. You know, we want to continue to educate the community, so you guys are well prepared and to go out there and take action courageously with confidence. So just so you know how it was marketed, and I don't see a lot of the pastors that I did speak to.
Or me as well, because we did talk to some of the other pastors. And that's also, the onus is on us and the leadership too, is to make sure that we do spread the news when this is going on and make sure that the other elders and pastors are aware. And we feel like between you and us, I think we did that, so.
Thank you for your boldness and your passion. I spent the last year as a 5th grade teacher at a local Christian school. We did 3 field trips. The first one was to the House of Ruth, where our 5th graders planted 2,400 flags in the ground representing the deaths of 2,400 children. Our second field trip was to Haven Health, where some of our kids said it was the best field trip they'd ever been on. And they helped people that couldn't take care of themselves. Our third field trip, we went to a trampoline park. But while they were there, they had to first make homeless care bags, compassion bags for homeless people. So you've got to teach compassion. And what I love about the local Christian school is that there's people from all walks of life. The trauma that comes into those classrooms that we have to deal with on a connected basis, raising everybody up, value everybody, it's hard sometimes. My question to you is, we talk about legislation, we talk about all these things, and it's like, what is the greatest way that you can show compassion? I'm going to stop on this. If I were to live my life, I want to live my life 2 feet from hell so that I can stop kids from going into that inferno. How do you teach compassion to kids?
She just answered the question. You're the example, right? So this may be a little dark, the way I taught my children. I remember when I was in California, still working corporate, and I was shopping near South Coast Plaza, and there was a homeless veteran with a sign asking for food. And I got 2 little kids in the back. So we immediately drove to a McDonald's. We got the highest protein drink, whatever it is that we got. And we drove by and we gave it to the veteran. But I was teaching kind of a dark lesson to my kids, and my wife obviously reprimanded me for doing it. So I said, do you know, kids, what the difference between a Republican and a Democrat? And the kids were like tiny little kids, and my wife said, oh no, don't you go there. I said, no, we're gonna teach them early. And I said, a Republican will go to McDonald's, and amazingly, the kids still remember the lesson in their late 20s. I said, a Republican will go to McDonald's and pick up the burgers and the milkshake and the fries and everything and hand it to the homeless veteran. A Democrat will run around the neighborhood collecting money from everyone first. It's called taxes. and then maybe buy a bag of chips. Amazingly, they still remember that little lesson. We have to be the example to do that. But I'm going to change the subject just a little bit. Let's talk about legislators for a second. And he and I just had that conversation today about legislators and the Second Amendment. So earlier this year, we had a Second Amendment rally, and I got up on the podium and I said, don't allow your legislators to use it as a bullet item on the platform. You have to believe it, you have to fight for it. Whether it's abortion, Second Amendment, education, whatever it is. Make sure your legislators aren't just talking about a bullet items. And I'll give you the example. We had 1,000 people coming to the city of Phoenix to defend the Second Amendment, and out of 47 Republicans, do you know how many people showed up? Out of 47? And it's in the city of Phoenix. 60% of your legislators live in Phoenix or Maricopa County. 6 legislators showed up. 6 showed up. And you'll see less of them during the midterm, the off-election year. You're not going to find too many candidates or legislators showing up when it's not an election year. I promise you I'm right. Tell me if I'm right. He's nodding his head because I work with him. I understand these things. So it's important for all of you not just to stand up and speak up, but go to an event and scream out, where is my representative? Where is my representative? So you can't teach compassion if they're not there to hear you, sir. That's what we need to do. We have the ability to put words on a sheet of paper and get the governor to sign it to make it a law that you and I all have to live by, but it's very difficult to find legislators out in the public. I'm not patting myself. I'm just crazy because my seatmate said, come sit for me. Here I am. But I was going to be in the audience, I told her, to support what she does. That's what we need to do as legislators.
Just 30 seconds.
I had to jump up and tell you some exciting news. I'm no longer the 5th grade teacher at Camp Verde Christian School. Don't applaud for that, please. Next year, I'm teaching 7th and 8th grade writing, public speaking, and debating from a biblical world viewpoint that uses apologetics to tackle the issues and cultural issues of the world. That's going to be hot.
Hello. There's one thing I've seen in the last 3 years when I saw our country falling apart. I started reading the Bible every day. And when I started reading the Bible every day, I found out what's wrong with America. We haven't been reading the Bible. The Bible is an instruction manual. If we don't read the instruction manual and teach our children what to do, this is where we're at. This is why the whole nation's gone to the toilet. It's because we stopped teaching our children. And that's how you fix it. We can't fix it through politics. We have to turn back to God. We have to seek the Lord. We have to pray and ask for forgiveness, and we will be saved.
Can we get confirmation from our speakers on that one?
I would like to make a comment on that. 100% agree. What I would say is that don't rely on the government for that to happen, because the government wants to be God. Do you know who pretty much said that? Karl Marx, right? Has anybody here read the Communist Manifesto? Highly encourage you do it if you haven't. And the reason why I say that is because you have to know what we're up against if you want to fight it. Right? I read it, and I'm not going to fearmonger, and I'm not going to tell you anything, but you're going to have a big realization when you read it. And that's that we are pretty dang close. Culturally, honestly, everything, we're pretty dang close. But we still can save it. So what I say is that it's up to us to do that. It's up to us to put God back into our lives. It's up to us to put God into our children's lives. And it's up to us to elect people who are going to put God back into government.
One more. First off, I just want to say thank you to Steve and Sheila for putting on the event. Thank you. We've talked a little bit about action today. I don't have questions so much as I'd like to ask to take some action with two of you on the stage. So first, the gentleman with Turning Point Action. I'd welcome the opportunity to focus on legislation here in Arizona that talks about transgenderism in youth sports. Tucson United School District is currently fighting a battle in court, but it has to do with sports in schools, so K through 12. Our youth sports today continue to be in danger. There are policies that are put into youth sports that openly allow transgenderism and for males to play female sports. They're restrictive for those that are on the board to actually take a stand without becoming legally responsible for those types of actions as well. Without that type of legislation, you're leaving it to individuals to try to stand on a hill that, quite frankly, we can't afford to fight those legal battles. So I would welcome the opportunity to write some of that legislation. There's plenty of that legislation out there for us to be able to copy and paste and do something quickly. Representative Nguyen, I once authored a report on ALIS for your Education Oversight Committee and specifically called out the grotesque spending of $78 million over 7 years. Your committee listened to that and actually stopped appropriating money to the Department of Education as a result of that and shut that down. I used to be responsible for upholding Arizona Revised Statute Title 18, specifically oversight of the implementation of large IT projects. Back in 2019, I got my hands slapped for calling out 2 elected officials for ignoring Title 18. And I would welcome the opportunity to talk with you a little bit about my time with the Department of Administration, specifically back in 2019, some of the, again, the violations to Title 18, specifically from the Secretary of State's office, and then the Secretary of State, Katie Hobbs, as well as some public records specifically on how they implemented the current election system for the state of Arizona.
So thank you for the question. I want to go back to the sports thing that you were talking about. In 2022, we actually passed a legislation, I can't remember the bill number, but that would stop biological men from playing in women's sports. And that bill, unfortunately, is sitting in court right now. Am I correct?
Yes, but that's just K through 12.
Right.
That's in schools, that's not youth sports outside of schools.
Okay, so that's just in school. You are correct. I don't know if I should be saying this, but I am going to say it, and I hope the people that are working with me right now, we're actually, believe it or not, man, do we have any Democrats in here? Yeah, well, yeah, this is important. We're actually actively trying to, I hate to say this, but define what sex is in terms of male-female and put that into our Arizona Constitution, okay? So what it does is, and I'm not gonna divulge much other than the fact that we're working extremely hard to make sure we solve the problem across the entire state of Arizona and not just K-12. And so I'm working on that right now. with the former speaker, Andy Tobin, of the House. And so, yeah, we need to resolve that problem, because you're seeing records after records being broken at all levels, from high school all the way to collegiate to, professional level. And we can't afford to do that. Now, just so you know, my daughter holds a triple jump record at Prescott High. It's only a matter of time that it'll be gone. And it took 17 years to break that record. And I told her just a couple of days ago, it's gonna be gone in a couple of years. It's not gonna stand because you have these people. But understand that we can't, so you, former policy advisor, I assume.
No. I worked on in oversight with an asset under Andy Tobin, actually.
So the reason why we're doing so many HCRs is because we don't have enough votes, and we don't have a governor that would sign anything meaningful from the Republican Party. And even when we have 31-29 in the House, 16-14 in the Senate, we are still suffering from one or two that will walk away. So now we're doing HCR to get around the governor. And it's really, even the HCRs are suffering from one or two Republicans. And I'm not gonna fault anybody. Everybody should vote their conscience, and that's fine. You don't agree with them, that's fine. But here we are, we're doing this, and we're hoping that we'll have 31 and 16 to agree that biological male should not have anything to do with women's sports. And like I said, since it's an HCR, it's across the board. And it's in the Constitution.
I'd like to say something as far as the policy part is concerned, in Turning Point. And I would say that we would love to do everything, but that's not a primary focus of Turning Point. However, what I will say, and this is not a plug because nobody here lives in Maricopa County, but I am running for the Maricopa County Young Republican Chairman. And thank you. And my plan, as I have detailed pretty much publicly all over social media, is to open up a policy portion of the organization. Maricopa County is the 4th largest county in the entire country, and you work to get all of these people elected, right? You have all of these connections and contacts, but you don't do anything with them when they get elected. And frankly, winning the election is only half the battle, and so I completely agree with you, is we need people that are going to write these policies to change these things. And so, Turning Point is such a massive organization that, I wish I could have the say and just be like, we're gonna absolutely do that. But what I will say is that I'm doing it as a concerned citizen and not so much as just an employee of Turning Point Action. And I would encourage everybody to do the same thing. Even though you're not a registered lobbyist, you're not a lobbyist, you're a concerned citizen, you have ideas. And I guarantee you, if you were to write up a piece of legislation and sit down with the legislature, sit down with somebody on the city council or on the school board and say, here's my idea, and work with that person, right? Work with Lori, right? And get that, sit down with them and say, hey, here's my idea, and you guys are able to work on that together. You're a concerned citizen, and now you're working on getting policy passed. That right there is incredible activism. That's how you change your community, and that's how you change your country.
One more question. It's been a long night.
Thank you to all of you. Especially, I want to thank Dr. Hansen. The Lord has some pretty strict injunctions against sexual sin, and your presentation just really scientifically proved that it looks like the Bible knows what it's talking about. I want to say I'm a school teacher and a product of a pretty standard teacher education system, and I'd say the majority of us come out with a disdain for founding fathers and chalking them up to being a bunch of slave owners and don't need to know more than that. And I've since recovered. But as far as I know, in Arizona, there's a law that you cannot talk about sexual education with children without parental consent, written parental consent. And as far as I know, that umbrellas into going into the transgender discussions and whatnot. And I'm wondering, one, is that true? And two, can such legislation be really better known? Can that be broadcast better to public school teachers so we don't have situations where a teacher's going to sit down with a bunch of 12-year-olds and say, let's go around and find out what our pronouns are? Or that if a child comes to a teacher and says, you know, today I'm a girl, my first step is to go immediately to the parent. But there is a push to take away parental authority and to say that can be our little secret. Sure, you can do that. We won't tell mom and dad. And so I'm wondering, is there a way that public school teachers in Arizona could be notified of what they can and cannot say regarding sexual things and transgenderism and whatnot? Because right now it seems to be kind of a free-for-all from my view from the inside.
From my perspective, I don't know, but I just think that more teachers need to be willing to just refuse to do it. And I did an amicus brief in Oregon for 2 teachers that just refused. And so more and more teachers are refusing and they're being upheld. So you pay a price initially, but you have to fight it in the long term. And I think each teacher has to decide, regardless of what the higher ups are saying, where they stand and stand on it. But like me speaking tonight is at risk. It's a risk for me. It's a risk for my license. But I think, you know, staying silent is just not the way to go. I mean, look at Nazi Germany. So we have to stand up regardless. And in terms of policy, I'll turn it over to you, though.
So I'm trying to do the best I can to try and recall one of the 1,700 bills that we somehow get through the legislature or get introduced every year. And I'm proud to say that out of 110 bills assigned to judiciary, I only heard 38. So I want to make sure that we don't hear every single bill. It's just totally crazy. But regarding what you were saying earlier about there are rules and there are regulations, and actually we're trying to pass the bill that would require a teacher to report to the parents. We're trying to pass that. And I believe it was unsuccessful. It was unsuccessful, right? So there are fine subjects that what you can report, what you should report, but I'm speaking from parents' point of view. If my son divulges some private information with you, and if you think it's inappropriate, I need to know so I can fix the problem. How many times have we said this evening that it's up to the parents to do things? But yet, I would say the teachers' union fought against that. I want to know, sir, you're teaching my 10-year-old daughter, and she tells you something that I should be able to fix. You should be able to tell me. Would you agree with that? Yeah. So we were trying to fight with that, and it just didn't materialize. But that's when I was in the education committee, so I'm more knowledgeable in that area in the first 2 years, but now I'm not anymore, so I'm just letting you know by memory what we were trying to do. And I think at the end of the day, the well-being of the children belongs to the parents. I don't want, if you find out that my son is a transgender, I would want to know. I would want to know. I would want to understand so that I can go talk to my son, hey, what's going on here? What's going on here? And it's rather alarming when he was talking about one of his slides up there that girls wants to get away from being beat up, raped, whatever it is, and now they want to be boys. I need to understand that. I need to know what's going on there, and it is alarming.
So there's a book by Dr. Miriam Grossman, and it's the book title is Lost in Translation, and it's an outstanding book. It's one of the best books. I wrote one myself. Hers is better, I have to say. But she is, I think she's more Jewish, but she's absolutely devout in terms of protecting children. But It's a must recommend because it gives lots of examples for how parents can advocate with the school against transgender early affirmation therapy. It's really, really good. Letters, and it's just actually form letters that you can use to send to your boards. So, yeah, Miriam Grossman, Lost in Translation, excellent book.
Yeah.
I just want to say thanks, and I want to say to any parents in here, if your children are in public school, to please watch carefully, find out what's happening, what's being said in the classroom, get to the board meetings. It's really important.
So guys, let's kind of end on a really positive note. We've talked about pornography, we've talked about abortion, we've talked about social media and all the problems that we're having with it, but I want you to know that the Yavapai Fatality Review Board report just came out, 2024. Guess how many of our young people under 18 years old in Yavapai County died of an overdose last year? 0. 0. And you know why that is? Because you guys, activists, MAP Force, volunteers, the churches, we've all been so worried about fentanyl, we're out there making it happen. That's the really good news. Here's a little bit of bad news, but it's a challenge for us. What does Daniel 11:32 tell us? The people who know their God will stand firm and take action. Where we're seeing a problem is guys over 60. There was a 600% increase in fentanyl overdose. We're not sure why. We didn't have the footnotes. Are they looking for medication because they're in chronic pain and they can't get the medication that they need? Or are they lonely? Like Dr. Hansen was saying, purposeless. They need connection. Boy, would I love to see our guys, our good guys in Yavapai County over 60, get paired up with some of these kids, these volunteer organizations, and make it happen. Everybody benefits, our guys and our kids. Amen.
Yes. So what she just kind of explained is that we have different jobs open, Turning Point Action does, to go and chase ballots. And so we have ballot chase managers, and then we have ballot chasers, and I'll kind of explain what ballot chasing is just really quick, and then I know we want to get out of here. Ballot chasing is essentially going and making sure that people have a plan to vote. Going to these people's houses, building relationships with them and saying, hey, this is why it's important that you vote, being community leaders, just in our neighborhoods. Right? We're not sending people from California, New York in here, we're hiring people from the town, right, from the city, from their precinct to go and do this work. And we're doing this because we have 300,000 of our own people not showing up. And so if you're interested in a job like that, you can go to tpaction.com/careers, check them out. And I'm sure that we have jobs posted for you guys. But I want to say thank you so much, everybody, for sticking around. We have a country to save. Don't go home. Don't sleep through November and sit there and think that you could have done more. Do everything that you possibly can as the last line of defense to save this country. God bless you. God bless America. God bless Arizona.
Just real quickly, we forgot we have a congressional candidate down there, Jack Smithfield, for CD2. So I just want to mention that.
Hey, give these speakers a big round of applause. It's been a long night, and when I called these guys to set up this event, they didn't ask for a dime. They just said, yes, put me in. They are amazing, as you guys are. It's been a long night. We had a lot of information. God bless you guys. Love you. I love this Verde Valley. Let's keep it going.